Meet the Incredibles. Two worlds collide by iKatnissStarkWestoftheFlock. Summary. What if Violet and Wilbur knew each other when Wilbur left the door open? Before Violet became an open superhero? Before she got asked out by Tony? This is their story. Follows through both movies. Willet, Violet, and Wilbur. Chapter 1. How it started. Wilbur and Violet's secret. Violet sat down on the bench of her new elementary school. She, and her family, had just moved into a new home. It was the middle of the semester, and by 10 years old, kids aren't really kind to new kids, being as they're too busy having fun with their own friends to even bother talking to the new girl. The new girl. Violet hated that title. She knew there was no other title, since she was, in fact, new, but she hated the recent titles everybody gave her. Geek, the shy girl, the loner. So she didn't want to spend her day making teachers' lives miserable. So she didn't want it to end up a screw-up when she grew older. So she wanted to go to Princeton when she finishes high school. She didn't understand what was so wrong with that. Violet saw the other girls playing house, and she saw the other boys playing superheroes. Violet smiled. She was a superhero herself. But since the law forbade superheroes to use their powers, or to reveal their powers, Violet could not show her invisibility and her force fields. She discovered her powers 3 years ago, as a 7-year-old. This, of course, happened when she couldn't find herself in the mirror, and she started panicking, thinking she was a ghost. So Violet was stuck doing homework during her recesses. That, or she just watched the other kids have fun with their lives while she didn't. Right now, she was trying to figure out divisions. Sure, she was sick during that they first learned about divisions, and the teachers did promise her she'd teach her. But Violet enjoyed being the first of the class, so it was only natural she'd try learning divisions by herself, but she couldn't. She tried a couple of divisions herself on her notebook, and each time she used one page and ripped it off, annoyed. When she tried 55 divided by 5, and couldn't, she finally threw the notebook behind her, barely looking back and caring if it hit anyone. How could she, the smartest of her class, not learn how divisions worked? Stupid divisions. She muttered under her breath. Suddenly, she felt a tap on her shoulders. Violet turned around and saw a boy she's never met before. She's been here for 2 weeks, and this boy looked her age. The boy's hair was black, just like Violet's, and it was formed in some sort of cowlick. He was wearing a black t-shirt with a blue circle in front and a lightning bolt on it, and wore a light brown jacket and jeans. "Hey kid, is this yours?" he asked, rubbing the back of his head. "Oh, sorry. Did it hit you?" Violet asked, suddenly regretting throwing her notebook back. The boy had seen Violet's face, and suddenly he felt dizzy. In a good way. He felt like just looking at her face and not saying anything else. He could have spent the whole day just looking at her, until he suddenly remembered he was angry with this girl. And instead of thinking it over, he immediately said, Yeah, duh. You should watch it next time." "Okay, I'm sorry," Violet said shyly. "Great. I just hit my notebook on this boy. He must hate me right now," she thought. Then the boy looked at Violet with a hint of guilt. He just didn't want it to get hit by a book, not hurt the girl. "Actually, you know what? It's okay. Just make sure it doesn't happen again," he said. Violet was surprised by his sudden change, but answered, "Okay, I won't. I'm, Wilbur Robinson. I just moved here and I don't know anyone. And, Wilbur paused, not sure of what to say. He just screamed at this girl. Now he's being nice to her. To him, it didn't make any sense, and it didn't make any more sense to Violet. I'm not making a very good first impression, am I?" Wilbur said sort of sadly. He knew making friends, especially at his age when everybody has their childhood friends, was hard enough without being the new kid. Violet didn't answer, at least, not at first. The boy was visibly upset, but Violet wasn't so sure she should be friends especially with him. No, not really," Wilbur sighed sadly. "I never think before I speak. Guess that gives me a lot of trouble making friends." Violet didn't exactly know what to say, but she did feel sorry for this boy. She knew about the pressures of being new. Her good, gentle nature told her to help him, but her mind told her not to. Nonetheless, she followed her nature for once. Well, I always think before I speak, but this gives me more trouble than you think. It'd be nice to say what I think for a change, instead of always being quiet, Violet admitted. Wilbur rose his eyebrow. Was she being nice to him? After how he snapped at her? Are you being nice? Wilbur asked, not believing what he saw. Or maybe he misinterpreted it. Yes, Violet answered nonchalantly, standing up in front of Wilbur. And you're nice too. Then she smiled a sweet smile at him. I am? Yes, the only reason you weren't nice at first is because I hit you. It's only natural to feel like that, she said, still keeping her sweet smile. Oh, so, you think I'm nice? Wilbur said, starting to smile. Yeah, she said. So, since you don't have any friends, want to be my friend? Wilbur smiled excitedly. Yeah, sure. That's how the two first met. No one believed these two would later grow up to be best friends, at least not according to their personalities. Violet was the shyest, sweetest, and smartest girl they've ever known. Wilbur, on the other hand, was the outspoken weirdest and the couldn't-care-less-about-school kind of boy, despite being Cornelius Robinson's son. But as the years passed by, both taught each other an important lesson. For Wilbur, Violet had taught him just when he should think, and when he shouldn't. But when he was with Violet, he could say anything he wanted to. He barely had to think. Violet accepted him with kindness and understanding. For Violet, Wilbur taught her to be more open. Even if she was still shy, she could express anger even more, which was rather healthy for her. But Wilbur was the only one to bring the crazy out of Violet. It's years later, and they're still friends. But one night, Wilbur did a horrible mistake. A rainy, dark night, where Wilbur was currently angry at his father. His father had finished a second time machine, and he wouldn't let anyone, including his son, who was usually the first to see about his father's creation, wouldn't show it to him. Wilbur pleaded and pleaded, and it ended with Cornelius yelling at him, in his angriest. For the last time, Wilbur, you cannot see it. Now go to your room and leave me alone. When Cornelius yelled, everybody in the Robinson house widened their eyes in guilty. Sure, Wilbur was at his naggiest, and it was only natural. But they jumped at Cornelius's voice. That night, Cornelius left before dinner without apologizing, and left for his business trip. And he would leave for a few good days. Franny asked Cornelius if he thought he was being too harsh, but Cornelius was too angry to respond. He knew what he did was terribly wrong, but he thought it wasn't a good time to apologize. Yet. As for Wilbur, he went into his room, locking it, went into his bed, yelled into his pillow. Wilbur was so angry, when his phone rang, he barely looked at the caller ID, and smashed his phone against the wall. Later that night, the Robinson dinner was silent. They still could not believe the incident that had happened an hour ago. So when the phone rang, Franny, Gaston, and Art all raced to get it, to avoid the awkwardness at dinner. But Franny got it. Hello? Mrs. Robinson? Oh, Violet. Franny smiled. Thank goodness it's you. Did something happen to Wilbur? He won't answer his phone or my messages. Oh, Violet. He and Cornelius got into some sort of fight. He won't speak to anyone. Can you please come over and talk to him? She pleaded. Violet knew it was pretty late, but she figured she could go. This was Wilbur they were talking about, who wasn't usually upset, so there must be something wrong. Okay, I'll be there. Violet hung up after saying goodbye. She slowly went downstairs, tried to go into the garage, and left a note, just in case. She got her bike and went over to the Robinsons. When she got there, she tiptoed, so Dimitri and Spike wouldn't come. But they heard her anyway. Hey, Vi, ring my doorbell, Dimitri said. No, ring my doorbell. Spike insisted. Violet chuckled. The first time she came here, the twins spooked her, and she accidentally rang Spike's doorbell. And they argued whether this counted or not. Just because she was closer to Dimitri, she rang his doorbell. Ha! Dimitri won. Spike 0. Dimitri bragged. Nonsense. She only rang your doorbell for she was closer. Had she been closer to mine, she would have rang mine. Then before Violet could begin being annoyed with their conversation, Lefty had answered the door and mumbled, "Good evening to you too, Lefty," Violet said politely. As she entered, Franny quickly came and hugged her. "Thank God. Violet, when you get there, can you give this to him?" she asked, handing her a plate of pizza. "Okay." She came upstairs and opened Wilbur's door. He was upset indeed. His lamp was broken. A glass of water was shattered on the ground. Posters were ripped and Wilbur lied on his bed in a curl. It almost broke Violet's heart to see him like that, so upset. "Wilbur, Vi," he said, looking behind him and saw her. "Hi, are you okay?" Violet wondered. "And your mom wanted me to give you this." Violet showed him the plate of pizza, but when Wilbur saw it, he shook his head. "I don't want any, thanks." Whoa, Wilbur Robinson refusing pizza. Something must be seriously wrong, Violet said, half seriously, but trying to lighten him up. She decided to say this a bit jokingly. Wilbur chuckled a bit. Yeah, there is." Violet sat beside Wilbur as he told her the story. Violet sighed. Again, Wilbur did not understand why he wasn't supposed to nag his father, just to see a time machine. He nearly broke the first one. Maybe your dad was right. "Violet, you can't take my dad's side. How would you feel if I took your mother's side? I never got into something like this with my parents," Violet said smartly. "Oh, right." Wilbur sighed. "I guess I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. Guess I should apologize to Dad when he gets home from his business trip." "Yeah, you should." Violet smiled. "Or I could sneak in tonight." Wilbur smiled. "Yeah, sure, and what?" "Wilbur, no, don't," Violet said. "Why not, Vi? It's perfect. Nothing wrong can happen. I'll just tell my mom I forgot my bag there." "Why on earth would you lose a bag in a garage?" Violet snapped. "You can't go. I have a bad feeling about it." "Oh, Vi, Will, I have to get going. Just promise me you won't go in there," she asked. "Violet, don't make me do this. I'm sure your dad will let you see it when he comes back. And when he does, it'll be worth it." She smiled. Wilbur sighed. "Okay, fine. I promise." "All right, well, I gotta go. I'll see you tomorrow," Violet asked. "Sure. Oh, and bring this," he said, throwing his blue hoodie. "It's starting to rain." "Thanks," Violet said as she left. When Franny asked her how Wilbur was, Violet answered, "He'll be fine." Franny thanked her and she left. When Violet was biking, she couldn't help but hear someone in the bushes, talking to a machine or something, but she shrugged it off and left. Once she was at home, Wilbur grabbed a white poncho, wore the biggest smile possible, and ran downstairs. "Mom, I'm feeling 10 times better," he announced. "Oh, that's great. I knew Violet visiting would help you." She smiled. "Yeah. Oh man, I forgot my school bag in the garage and I have homework to do. Mind if I go in?" Wilbur said, in the sweetest voice he had. I'm breaking my promise. But when I tell Violet tomorrow nothing went wrong, she'll totally forgive me in a second," Wilbur thought. As his mother gave him the keys to the garage, he ran there and saw the newest time machine. It was all blue, and much better than the other one. The buttons looked so high-tech, and Wilbur smiled and took a picture with his camera and left the garage. "Wilbur, don't forget to close the door." "Yeah, Mom," he yelled back. Hearing a lightning, he rushed to the Robinson home and left the door open. After lying to his mom, he got into his room, smirking. Show what Violet and his father knows. Nothing bad happened. Nothing bad at all. At least, it wasn't until the next day that he found out he had made the biggest mistake of his life, just by going to the garage. Chapter 2. Tony Ridinger. Wilbur smirked as he reattached his broken phone. He, for once, had outsmarted both his father and Violet. Granted, he had no idea whose reaction he was going to be more afraid of. When he broke a promise to Violet, she gave him the silent treatment for 1 week, And when she snapped at him, she made him feel so guilty he could have cried. And his father was the ideal father, putting up with Wilbur's mischievousness. But even he could get angry with discipline, and tonight proved that. Needless to say, both could be harsher than anyone when Wilbur did something bad. And the next day, Wilbur quickly went on the bus, afraid he'd miss it, and tripped in front of the bus driver and many other students in the process. Some students started to laugh, but the female students seemed to be distracted. And it wasn't until their distractee saw him that they started to laugh. Wilbur rolled his eyes. How much could everyone laugh at a boy falling down? He ignored it and went to his seat. In front of him was where every girl was circling. "Oh, Tony, you're so cute!" A girl giggled. Wilbur grunted frustratedly. Was this another Mr. I'm so hot? He looked at the boy in front of him. He was Wilbur's complete opposite. He seemed like the nice guy, who was polite, a total teacher's pet, Mr. Perfect. Wilbur didn't bother trying to say, "Hi, I'm Wilbur," but Tony did. "Hi, Tony Ridinger, are you okay?" he asked. Yeah. Wilbur Robinson. You might have heard of my dad. Cornelius Robinson, best inventor of the world, invented a bunch of stuff that cost more than your fancy schmancy clothes there. Yeah, I'm rich. And I own inventions you've barely even heard about. He smirked. Sure. Wilbur let his ego get to him, but it was so worth it. It's an honor to meet you. Tony smiled. Wilbur twitched. Even when he was bragging to this guy, he was still being nice. I know. Wilbur gritted through his teeth. Meanwhile, Violet and Wilbur would meet up in front of the school's front stairs, as usual. However, Violet arrived early and noticed a bunch of people were surrounding someone. To get a better view of who it was, she stood on the concrete stair banister. There she saw the most gorgeous boy she's ever seen. The boy had light green eyes, red hair, and a smile simply to die for. And of course, surrounded by every girl that attended her school. Violet looked at him dreamily, and no one seemed to notice her lovesick look, except for Wilbur. As he passed next to her, he tried to identify who she was staring at. Violet? Earth calling Violet Parr? Violet Anna Parr? But Violet stared at the boy. Who is that? Wilbur looked at where Violet pointed at. Oh, him. Wilbur said, a bit annoyed. I think that's Tony Ridinger. Or was it Tony Dondelinger? I forgot. Either way, think he's the new kid. Why? Violet smiled at Tony. No reason. Wilbur finally understood Violet's look. Oh, Vi, please don't tell me you like him. Every girl here already has a crush on him. He complained. I don't have a crush on him, Wilbur. I just find him cute, Violet said. And she was honest. She found him cute, but she didn't seem to have a crush yet. Oh, right. This face doesn't say I love you already, Wilbur said, mimicking Violet's love-struck face. Yeah, it doesn't. Violet smirked. After the whole day, every girl followed Tony like zombies on a human. And Tony, being the good guy he was, didn't take advantage of his popularity. At least, it didn't seem like it. He was gentle with those girls, even when telling them he wasn't interested. Some girls even claimed that even the way he dumped them was the sweetest thing they've heard. During lunch, after the words of what her friends had told her, Violet immediately became attracted to Tony. And she didn't hide it this time. During lunch at Violet and Wilbur's table, she was smiling at Tony behind her face, which was always covered with her hair. When Tony got a glance at Violet's table, Violet blushed and looked away. Wilbur saw her quick away glance and felt a slight pang of jealousy. Who are you looking at, Violet? Wilbur rhetorically asked. The most perfect guy in the school, she whispered, thinking no one could hear her low voice. Well, I wouldn't say I'm perfect, Vi, but thanks. Wilbur smirked. Violet jumped at his voice. Did you hear that? No, duh. Vi, you're hooked on this guy. Please don't be another one of his fangirls. I won't. I actually have brains. She smirked. Besides, a guy like that would never go for me. A guy like what? Wilbur asked. Funny, strong, smart, cute. Violet sighed. It's a needle in a haystack. What? Okay, Vi. I may not be smart, but I was voted class clown. I have a black belt in karate and I'm 100% cute. I mean, look at this, he said, starting his adorable puppy dog eyes and pout. Okay, I'll give you that, but you get what I mean? Close to perfect guys never go out with me. Well, I woo. Then Wilbur stopped talking. He was about to say, well, I would go out with you, but he stopped himself quickly. Sure, ever since he first saw Violet, he couldn't help but stare in her sky-blue eyes, and he always wanted to start smiling when she smiled. But she had a crush on a guy he couldn't compete with, and he did not want to put her in a complicated situation, especially after he broke his promise. I mean, you are attractive. You just need to be less shy. No, that's a total lie. I don't want you to be less shy. I want you to be yourself, because ever since I met you, I've always loved you just the way you are. Wilbur thought sadly. And you could talk to him. No, please don't talk to him, he thought, and ask him out, and maybe he'll accept. Violet smiled. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for the advice, Will. I'm going to go find Starla so she can give me advice on asking guys out. As Violet ran to find her flirtiest friend, Starla, Wilbur couldn't help but smile. He didn't understand himself why on earth he would smile. The woman he loved just claimed she wants to go out with another guy, but he was smiling. Why? Was it because she was so happy, and her smile made the pain of telling her to go out with him all worthwhile? He didn't know, but honestly, seeing her so happy, he didn't seem to care. Chapter 3. He looked at me. School ended, and Violet had been hiding from Wilbur for the rest of the afternoon. Why? Because she chickened out on asking Tony to go out with her, and she didn't want Wilbur to think she was a weakling. Her class got out early, since everyone got A's in the test. The teacher let them 5 minutes earlier. This gave Violet some time to think. Also, why did she had to be so shy? Why couldn't she just be as outgoing as Wilbur, or Starla, or any of her friends? She sighed. She decided to try and give up on Tony, knowing it would never happen. Suddenly, Violet smiled, proud of herself. She just gave up her first crush, and handled it with maturity. Her hair was getting in her face, so she pushed her hair a bit away from her face, until the bell rang, and she heard a familiar voice. She turned around to see Tony riding Jur taking a deep breath of the fresh air. "Hi, Tony," a girl from Violet's class said flirtiously. Hey," Tony said, completely uninterested but politely. Then his friends proceeded on taunting him, mimicking the girl. "Hi, Tony. Do you play football?" Johnny, one of Tony's friends, joked and started making kissy noises. As Tony chuckled, Violet's crush grew stronger and stronger and gasped, "Ha, that's very funny." Tony laughed. "Hi, Tony," Violet said so low no one would have heard her. But Tony did. As he turned around, Violet quickly turned invisible. Tony looked around, looking for the girl who said his name, but he didn't see anyone. He shrugged it off and left. Violet returned visible, sat down on the back of the wall and covered her mouth, smiling. He looked at me. Violet blushed. She got on her knees and watched as Tony left. Wilbur saw Violet and saw her smile. He figured she'd asked Tony out, and he said yes. He was happy for her, but couldn't help but feel a little bit sick inside. All of his feelings aside, he knew it was the perfect time to tell Violet he'd broken his promise. But as he walked by her, Violet heard a car honk. "Come on, Violet!" Dash yelled. Violet quickly ran towards the car and went in. "Vi, wait!" he yelled. But Violet had left. Wilbur sighed. He was going to have to tell her once she got home. Violet kept that dazed look in her face as she went into the car. Thankfully, Helen didn't notice. Dash did, though. Once Violet came home, she sat on her bed and listened to her iPod, still keeping that smile on her face. Then she heard an annoying voice singing, "Violet's got a boyfriend. Violet's got a boyfriend." Dash sang over and over. Violet looked and was too happy to tell her brother to shut up. "I told you, Dash, is Wilbur's not my boyfriend, she said, in that dazed and angelic voice she currently had. I wasn't talking about Wilbur. And why are you so happy? Aren't you always moody? Dash asked. But Violet just hummed along the songs, not answering. All right, who is this guy? Tony Ridinger, Violet sang. Had she been in her normal, sane state, she wouldn't have said anything, and she would regret it as soon as Dash opened his mouth the next. Tony Ridinger? Ooh, boy, this is rich! Dash laughed. Violet gasped, realizing what she had just done. And you think he likes you? Well, yeah, he looked at me, Violet said defensively. Oh yeah, were you invisible? Dash asked. Violet's happy face went sad and taken aback. She was invisible. He only saw her because she was invisible. In an instant had Dash realized just at what point he had hurt his sister. He might have stopped talking, but since he was only 10, he didn't understand. Of course you were. This Tony guy doesn't care. He never looked at you. He was looking into thin air. Face it, sis. Invisibility isn't only how you are to other superheroes. It's what you are to other normals, too. If, in years from now, Dash would remember his sister's crushed face, he would have hidden shame and started crying and apologizing for hurting his sister. But he was young. He went too far, and he did not notice. Violet sat down on her bed and buried her head in her knees. She wasn't sure whether to cry or be angry, but either way, she didn't want people to see her. Not yet. Then she heard her phone ring. Hello? She whimpered. Vi, are you okay? You sound upset. Wilbur's worried voice filled through the phone. I'm fine. You're not a good liar, Violet. What's wrong? Wilbur asked. He wondered what she had to be sad about. Didn't she ask Tony out? I thought Tony liked me. Violet stuttered. Wilbur was shocked. Did Tony refuse her? Only an idiot would refuse Violet. Wilbur grew angry that Tony made her this sad. But he only looked at me. Because I was invisible. She finished sadly. Violet gasped, realizing what she had just said. She just said she was invisible. Wilbur, I can explain, she said. No, Vi, you don't have to. I completely understand, he said. Violet bit her fingernails. He had figured out. She was a superhero. Her secret identity was discovered. You think you're invisible to guys, but you're not, Vi. Just forget him. It's his loss if he refused. Wilbur reassured. Violet giggled. Good old dumb Wilbur. He thought that Violet meant invisible, as in metaphorically. I guess not. She smiled weakly. She was relieved he didn't figure it out, but still a bit upset of what her brother told her. You're not happy yet, aren't you? Wilbur said. Of course I am. Violet insisted. Nuh-uh, and I'm going to keep nagging you until you're happy and cheered up. Now you cheered up yet? Yes. Violet giggled weakly. Are you happy yet? Yes. Violet laughed, getting rid of her smile. I can't hear you, Vi. Yes, she yelled, laughing and not caring about what her brother said anymore. Perfect. So you're in a good mood? Wilbur asked, smiling. Yes, thanks for that, Will. Violet smiled. She felt much better and didn't want to waste any time talking about Tony. So, you did keep your promise last night, right? That is an excellent question. Wilbur said his motto. You went in the garage, didn't you? Violet said almost as soon as he finished. What? No, I didn't. God, Violet, you really underestimate me, don't you? Wilbur said, using his age-old lying trick. But this didn't get past Violet. So, Wilbur, I figured out your lying techniques a week after I met you. The first trick is saying your catchphrase. That's an excellent question, when you know the answer is bad. If it backfires, the second trick is you're trying to guilt-trip the others when they accuse you of something, so they'll immediately drop it. Violet smirked. Okay, fine. I went in. I took a picture, but nothing happened. I opened the door, took a pic, and closed. Suddenly, Wilbur paused. Did he close the garage door? Panic struck all over his body, and he started to shiver. Violet got this worried look in your face. Wilbur, you broke your promise. Vi, it was a good cause, I swear. Wilbur reassured, and he knew right away Violet didn't buy it. She knew something was up, but her mother yelled for dinner. I have to go, bye. Please be locked, please be locked, please be locked, he pleaded in his thoughts. Wilbur saw the unlocked garage door and hurried inside. Oh man, I did leave it open, Wilbur thought. Running inside, he saw Carl, with a bowler hat. An old tall man, riding in the newest time machine, stared at them in horror. Doris, get those kids out of here. Doris? Who's Doris? He wondered. Carl came to Wilbur, as if he was under control. Wilbur didn't understand what was going on, until Carl pushed him to the wall. Carl, what are you doing? Wilbur yelled in horror. Then the man in the time machine snickered. Ha ha! This robot is no longer Carl, my dear boy. Wilbur did not listen. He got up, ran to Carl, and grabbed him from his neck. Wilbur quickly jumped on Carl's back and took the hat, which he assumed was the thing that had made Carl act this way. Doris, hurry up! He motioned, grabbing Doris and putting her on his head. So long! Oh, I won't be seeing you anymore, you weird-haired son of Robinson, he said, snickering away with the time machine. Wilbur saw in horror as the machine flew in the air, went invisible, and disappeared. What happened? Carl said, waking up. Carl, what happened? I don't know. This weird bowler hat guy put a bowler hat on my head. Next thing I know, I was trying to kill you or something. What happened? Carl asked. I think you were under control, Wilbur said, coming to help Carl. But as he did, he found a pink notebook on the ground with a picture of a unicorn in it. It had a list of things to do. 1. Steal time machine. 2. Ruin science fair. 3. Passed off invention as my own. And 4. Get the boy. Carl gasped. He knew for a fact Cornelius's first invention, and how Cornelius got adopted, was during a science fair. This guy is about to wipe out your existence. Chapter 4. Wilbur's Plan. Violet's happy state only lasted for about 3 seconds as she went down for dinner. She was sad because what her brother said was true, and Wilbur had, yet again, broken another promise. She had barely tried to listen to her family's conversation. She heard something about her father reading at the table, her brother being sent to the principal's office. Her sadness wasn't so well hidden. She kept playing with her food, and she loved meatloaf. So, how about you, Vi? How was school today? Helen asked. Nothing to report, Violet said. You've barely even touched your food. Helen remarked. I'm not really hungry for meatloaf, Violet muttered. Well, it is left overnight. We have steak, pasta. What are you hungry for? Violet hadn't planned on answering until her brother spoke up. Tony Ridinger. Violet suddenly dropped her fork. Shut up, she said angrily. Well, you are, Dash said defensively. I said shut up, you little insect, Violet shouted threateningly. Well, she is, Dash whined. Do not shout at the table, honey, Helen yelled. Kids, listen to your mother, Bob said. Violet rolled her eyes. She knew her father would say this when his mind was somewhere else. Violet and Dash quiet down, and Violet played with her food again, until Dash said once again, she'd eat if we were having Tony loaf. That's it, Violet yelled, jumping on her brother and turning invisible. She knew it wouldn't help with her clothes, but she was so mad she didn't think about it. She started punching her brother's face. Dash kept saying, stop it, and Jack started laughing loudly. Once Dash had the chance, he broke away from Violet's grip. You're gonna be toast, he yelled, repeatedly running around the table and hitting Violet as he ran. Hey, Violet yelled. She found it unfair that in a fight, Dash would use his superpowers to escape. Violet stopped Dash with a force field and snickered. Hey, no force field, Dash whined, as if force fields were more unfair than super fast running. Yeet, you started it, Violet exclaimed childishly. She'd admit, but it was the truth, and there was no other way to say it. Helen grabbed with her hand Violet. "You sit down!" And then grabbed Dash. "And you sit down!" Violet didn't listen to her mother, running under the table, and so did Dash, resuming their fight. "Violet!" Helen yelled. "It isn't my fault!" Violet yelled, grabbing Dash and trying to slam his head against the table as Dash tried to break free. The fight went on for a while because her dad didn't bother showing up. And finally, Helen yelled, "Bob, it's time to engage." Bob had just found out Gazerbeam disappeared and was annoyed his wife was bugging him at a time like this. He put the paper down and went into the kitchen to find his elastic wife holding her kids under the table. "Don't just stand there. I need you to do something. I need you to ... intervene." "You want me to intervene?" "All right, I'm intervening," he yelled, grabbing the table and pulling it up high. "I'm intervening." The family mess went on for a few minutes until they heard a doorbell. Violet and Dash went back to their seats. Helen let go of her kids, and Bob let go of the table. "Hello?" Jack gurgled. Violet had hoped it was Wilbur because she needed to have a serious talk with him. But instead, it was the family's good friend, Lucius. Violet sighed and sat back, playing with her food like before. She didn't bother to listen to the rest. Wilbur and Carl panicked about their little machine stealing secret. It took 10 minutes for Carl to calm down. "This guy is going to ruin your birth, your father's future, my birth, and is going to change the future. What are we going to do? For the love of criminy, what are we going to do?" Wilbur slapped Carl. "Calm yourself, you idiot. We're in enough trouble as it is. We're stressed enough, and we do not need to panic. I got a foolproof plan, and what if it doesn't work? Huh, Wilbur? Have you thought of your dad? What if he never meets your mom? Have you thought about the rest of the family, or of the human race? Have you even thought about Violet?" Carl panicked. Wilbur stopped dead in his tracks. He hasn't thought about the if it doesn't work part. In fact, he was so sure of himself, he didn't think about the rest of the family, the human race, and Violet. What would happen if he didn't succeed? Wilbur looked on the ground, frowning. "No, we can't afford to think like that. It's gotta work ... IT quote S got to..." Wilbur sighed, getting into the first time machine. "Are you sure you should use that? Didn't Cornelius said it wasn't working that well? We've got no other choice. It's got some juice left. The plan is foolproof. Go to past, find bowler hat guy, stop him from destroying Dad. Actually, as a kid, he was called Louis. Okay, find that bowler hat guy, stop him from destroying Louis's invention. And if he does destroy it, I'll have to admit I'm from the future and get him to fix the time machine then," Wilbur said, saying the riskiest plan ever known. "What? Wilbur, you can..." "Do you have a better idea?" Wilbur snapped. Carl stayed silent. He didn't have a better idea. In fact, he had no idea. But he had a bad feeling about Wilbur's plan. "Okay, go," Carl muttered. Wilbur nodded. "Cover me if the family or Violet comes." Carl agreed, as Wilbur disappeared with the time machine. He sighed. He knew this was a bad idea. He could feel it inside of him. But right now, Wilbur's plan was their one and only hope. If they had any, at least. Chapter 5. Something's up. Carl had panicked. It has been 1 week exactly since Wilbur had left in the time machine, and tomorrow, Cornelius would return. Could it be Wilbur was trapped in the past? Carl had been telling the family for the past week that Wilbur had a contagious but not serious flu that only lasted 1 week, and being as he is a robot, he's the only one who could approach Wilbur. But thankfully, early Friday, just 1 day before Cornelius's return, Wilbur had returned. With Louis. That week, Violet had tried calling and talking to Wilbur, who always seemed busy. As Carl would put it, Violet's family had been in a great mood lately. Her dad had been chosen to go on a very important business trip, and this set up the troubles between her parents, especially after yesterday, when they were having a discussion. Violet was happy about the new, calmer atmosphere in her home, but she was still worried about Wilbur. What could he, or even she, had done to make him hide away from her, and from his own family too, apparently. She had put her foot down. Come hell or high water, she would talk to him. She grabbed her phone, about to call him again, but her phone had a call. "Hello? Violet. Hey, it's Wilbur," he said. "Wanna explain how you just broke your promise, then you barely talked to me for a week?" Violet asked angrily. Technically, IT quote S, only been 5 days, and... Wilbur, you know what I mean. What's going on there? That is an excellent question. Wilbur's sweat dropped. Violet being mad at him was one of his new many problems. One is he may stop existing and he might just change the time-space continuum. Vi, something's happening right now. Something serious. Violet started to get worried. What do you mean? Vi, I really don't think you should know. Wilbur, trust me. I can help, Violet insisted. Violet, it's better that I handle this, Wilbur said. Violet shook her head. Why aren't you telling me? She asked softly. Wilbur bit his lip. If there was anyone in the world he wanted to tell the whole thing that was happening right now, it was probably Violet. And had he known she was a superhero, in a family of superheroes too, he might have told her since he might need their help. But in his eyes, Violet Parr and her family were normal and ordinary, and he knew that Violet would never give up, so he had to let her down. He had no other choice. He just prayed this new plan of his would be worth the trouble. Because you wouldn't understand, he yelled angrily. Violet was taken aback. Did Wilbur Robinson just yell at her? Sure, Wilbur has had numerous fights and aggressivity with others, but never had he once thought about yelling or being angry at Violet. In a brief few moments of silence, you could only hear Violet's heavy breathing, still in shock over Wilbur yelling at her. At first, she was sad. Then she had enough. First, he doesn't answer her calls. Then her own brother insults her in the worst way possible. And now Wilbur dared to test her patience. Enough was enough. I would if you would just tell me, she yelled back. Maybe I don't want to tell you, Wilbur said, and could not bear to say what he said next. Maybe I don't want to tell you because you're just a freak. Violet put a hand on her mouth, shocked. Well, maybe I don't want to know anymore. Funny, 'cause a few seconds ago, you were begging me to know. Well, that was before I found out over the week. You became a jerk. She shot back, slamming her phone in her bed angrily. She sat down a few seconds on her bed, shaking like a leaf during the rain. She couldn't believe she had done that. She wanted to call back and ask for Wilbur's forgiveness. But why should she? He snapped first, and it was the truth. Yet, Violet shook uncontrollably, staring at her door. Suddenly, Dash came in. Vi, Mom snuck in some cool outfits. Come check it out, he said excitedly. At first, Violet did not want to move, but stay in her bed. But she followed Dash nonetheless. When she came into her mother's room, she saw her mom and Dash running around. She went in, unnoticed by her mother, and took a look at the cool outfits she snuck in. They were matching outfits, but different sizes. What are these? Violet asked, startling her mother. As her mother tried to explain, Dash rushed in and grabbed a suit from his mother's hands and ran it over to Violet. Hey, this is yours. It's specially made, he said, trying to interest Violet in these suits. But Violet eyed the suits strangely. What's going on? She asked. Helen grew tired and pushed her kids outside, sighing as soon as the door closed. Violet looked at her brother. What makes you think it's special? I don't know, Dash shrugged. But why'd Mom try to hide it? Dash quickly ran away with his new outfit enthusiastically, while Violet observed the suit. Dash had a point. The suit looked like a superhero's uniform. Violet wondered. She put her hand invisible and touched the suit, which became invisible, taking Violet aback and causing her to gasp. When she turned her hand visible, the suit regained all visibility. Shocked, she ran to her room and dialed Wilbur's number. She knew she shouldn't talk to him, but now was no time to think about what should or shouldn't happen. Hello? Wilbur, Peesh, I'm not here right now, so leave a message after the beep. Wilbur, something strange is happening. It's, I can't even explain it, but I think me and my family may be in danger. See, I haven't been totally honest with you. Me and my family have a secret. Oh, I can't tell you this over the phone. Just quickly call me as soon as you can," she said breathlessly. Something weird was going on. First, her dad goes on these business trips. She finds Mom finding a white hair. Her father's suit has been repaired, and now her mother had Meishing supersuits and is going to get her father? Were they truly in trouble? Wilbur gasped and dropped his phone right after his conversation with Violet. He had plenty of insults in his life, some involving words even someone like Wilbur wouldn't say. Many things that would make anyone cry. Many insults over the internet and in real life, since his father was well known. That would make the Undertaker cry. So many painful things that would have stabbed someone's heart without knowing them. And yet, he was unaffected. Because he knew that the people who'd say this did not know him, and only Wilbur can judge if he thinks it's true or not. And he did not care, because he didn't know them. But as Violet called him one of the common and least painful insults ever, knowing over 1,000 guys get called that every day, unaffected, he felt as if he could break down at that very moment. He had learned it didn't matter how harsh the insult was. It was the person who said it that made it hurtful. Even as Lewis tried to fix the time machine, Wilbur hung his head, ashamed of himself. He knew he had snapped at her for good reasons, and Violet being mad at him was part of his plan. After all, it was better for Violet to be angry than worried about him in his mind. But it still hurt badly. Wilbur, wrench, Lewis said underneath the time machine, pulling his hand out for a wrench. But Wilbur was too busy in his thoughts, looking at his reflection on the time machine's window. Lewis kicked his ankles. "Ow! What?" Wilbur snapped. "Wrench, what's with the attitude?" Lewis demanded. Wilbur groaned, getting the wrench and giving it to Lewis, who was already beginning to sound like his father. After a minute, Lewis re-asked his question. "I was serious. What's with the sudden attitude?" "That's an excellent question," Wilbur said. But this time, he didn't say it in a smart alecky, wise and mischievous way. He said it in a bored, disappointed, breathless way. Lewis noticed his depressed look. Being almost his age, Lewis knew when a boy felt this way. It was best not to talk about it. At least, not right now. Violet watched TV. Her mother left 10 minutes ago to get a plane, and Violet was left in charge of Jack, and Dash. And Dash knew, as he watched his show with Violet, that something was wrong. And even Violet couldn't shake this feeling. In fact, it scared her. So she finally said, "Dash, something's up with Mom and Dad." Dash turned his head to her. "I know. Wait a second. What if they're in trouble?" Violet rolled her eyes. "Of course they're in trouble. Their marriage is in trouble too. You heard them fight the other night. Dad's been secretly doing hero work with Lucius. So, we gotta follow Mom," Dash said brightly. "Are you crazy?" "No," Violet exclaimed. "Vi, you said it yourself. Something's wrong and we gotta fix it," Dash said, all high and mighty. And the high and mighty part really irritated Violet. "What can I do to fix it? I'm just invisible, remember?" she yelled, closing the TV and running up into her room, annoyed with her brother. Dash ran up to the room and saw Violet reading a magazine. At that point, Dash realized just how much what he said had affected her. He bit his lip regrettably and approached his sister slowly. "Listen, Vi, you're not invisible." "Then why'd you say I was?" Violet said angrily. "I'm your little brother. We're supposed to say stupid things," Dash said. Violet smiled softly. "Well, that's the least stupid thing you've ever said." Dash smiled back, and then regained his high and mighty voice. "So, now that that's clear, let's go get Mom and Dad." Violet widened her eyes. "Dash, we can't." "Call a babysitter. We're heading out to find Mom and Dad," he said proudly, running outside the room, rushing to his room, getting his suit and ran outside the house. Violet wanted to stop him, until she realized this would be pointless. Knowing her current situation, her mother would probably blame her. She looked at her suit and changed quickly into her suit too. As she went outside the house, she called her friend Kari. "Kari, I Need a Favor, Chapter 6, Violet's Death. Helen Parr sighed in the plane, thinking about many things, all of them including her family. One of them is she's scared for her husband. Where had he been? What has he been doing? She had already knew the answer a bit. Hero work, only this time he might have went too far. What was that mysterious white hair she had found? For now, neither she nor Bob have developed white hair, and she began to wonder, what had she done wrong? After all, the past week has been blissful. She and Bob had never been happier. Bob had begun to develop muscles again, and anyone who knew the Parrs knew the atmosphere has never been better. No, was there a way for Dash to be happy without using sports? Helen knew there was no way. Sure, Bob occasionally took Dash out to do sports when no one was around, but this simply isn't enough. Some kids have adrenaline rushes occasionally, but Dash was over-energetic and always twitching in class, and cannot stand still for more than 2 seconds. All this because of his superhero instincts acting up his energy. He has been releasing this energy by doing a series of pranks against most adults. She knew that if Dash could do sports, the pranks and the trips to the principal's office would stop. And as for Violet, what had happened all of a sudden? Sure, Violet has never exactly been the life of a party, and to other people, she might have appeared as her normal, moody, depressed self. But Violet was the sort of girl to not smile unless there were a reason to. And the Parr and Robinson family knew Violet was just like any typical girl, reading magazines, books, watching TV. She was just unnaturally shy. But lately she's been upset. Not her normal self, but upset and sad. And Helen couldn't figure out why. Did Violet know about the hair? About her mother's suspicions? Or did it have something to do because Wilbur hardly visited? Helen Parr sighed once again. After all these thoughts surrounding her, all of these thoughts about the past week, she realized the family wasn't as calm and relaxed as she thought they'd been. She looked in her duffel bag and saw the costume. On one hand, she couldn't help but think it was selfish of Bob to put his superhero needs above their family's safety. But on the other, just seeing that costume, Helen thought about her old life. How tempting it would be to relive it. In a split second, Helen figured she could forgive Bob. She did not like superhero work as much as Bob, but if it tempted her this much, she could imagine how it must have pushed Bob over the edge. She looked, and still no response from the island, and then she began to worry. Should she put the suit on? Just in case. Easy, Helen. Easy, easy, girl. You're overreacting. Everything's fine. Helen sighed, trying to think of an excuse to trick herself. They're just all getting coffee at the same time. Yeah, she said slowly. But she looked at the bag, then put the plane on autopilot. She grabbed the bag and changed in the restroom. When she came back, she threw the bag on a plane seat, only to hear someone say, "Ow!" Helen gasped. "Violet!" "It's not my fault," Violet insisted quickly. "Dash ran away, and I knew I'd get blamed for it, and—" Just then, Dash immediately appeared on the seat behind Violet. "That's not true. You said something's up with Mom and Dad, and we should—" After this, no one could understand a thing the two kids were saying their excuses in unison. Both of them knew that both of them had something to do with the fact they were there right now, but they decided to make the other one look worst. Okay, wait. You left Jack alone?" Violet and Dash once again started their unison fight, and Helen could have sworn she heard someone say they got a babysitter. "Okay, so who'd you get?" Violet watched as her mother, annoyed, called Kari the babysitter. Violet and Dash knew this was probably not the smartest thing to do, and Helen was desperately trying to talk to Kari, who kept on interrupting and insisting. Oh, that's when they all heard the beep. They turned their heads to the monitor and saw that there were 2 rockets following them, about to hit them. Helen gasped and immediately hung up and sat down. India Golf 9er, transmitting in the blind guard. Disengage. Repeat, disengage. Friendlies at 20 miles southwest of your position. Angels 10. Track east. Over. In the meantime, it was not going well for Wilbur. Inside, he had been panicking. It was only 2 in the afternoon, but his high hopes were slowly coming down as Lewis's confidence is more broken down than Wilbur had thought. Worst yet, he opened his voice messages and heard this. Wilbur, something strange is happening. It's, I can't even explain it, but I think me and my family may be in danger. See, I haven't been totally honest with you. Me and my family have a secret. Oh, I can't tell you this over the phone. Just quickly call me as soon as you can. It was Violet's message, and Wilbur had constantly tried to call her, beginning to worry for her, even going to her house, finding her friend Kari, who looked very tired and started screaming odd things like, Violet's baby brother is a demon and whatnot. Wilbur had begun to panic even more. Now there was this. And what was this so-called trouble? He had tried everything, and had begged Carl to look for her. And Carl picked up a signal from an airplane that Violet's mother used to fly, and picked up a signaled message. India Golf, Niner Niner, transmitting in the blind guard. Disengage. Repeat, disengage. Friendlies at 20 miles southwest of your position. Angels 10, track east, over. Wilbur suddenly looked worried. He did not necessarily understand what was going on, but Mrs. Parr's tone spoke for itself. What does this mean? He asked Carl. Carl had so much trouble telling Wilbur what he estimated was happening. The way Wilbur asked the way he did is a way a 4-year-old boy would ask, Mommy, why isn't Fido moving? And Carl couldn't bear to tell him, so just sent him another message. But they knew they weren't supposed to hear this one. Violet, you have to put a force field around the plane. Both Carl and Wilbur were puzzled. How was Violet supposed to have a force field around a plane? But you said we weren't supposed to use our powers. Violet's voice yelled in despair. There was rumbling, followed by the sound of something swishing by, and Wilbur and Carl knew what was happening. Violet! Wilbur yelled, knowing it would not help at all. But what powers were they talking about? What secrets had Violet kept from them? I know what I said. Helen said, listen to what I'm saying now. Mayday? Mayday? India Golf Niner Niner is Buddy spiked. Abort. Abort. There are children aboard this airplane. Helen announced, Violet, put a field around us now. But I never made one that big before. Wilbur froze. Mrs. Parr did not seem to be getting any help, and Violet was trying to help. But this was obviously the only time she couldn't. Wilbur knew that while you die, your life is supposed to flash before your eyes. He didn't know if this was happening to Violet, but it was certainly happening to him. The first time he met Violet, the first time they went into his house, the fights, and then he realized their argument on the phone just might have been their last. He did not care for these powers. He could have spent his whole life not knowing them, so long as Violet stayed alive. What really hurt him was that there were so many words unsaid, and might never be said. No, please, no, he whispered after his life flashed before him. He did not notice that his eyes were tearing up. Abort, 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 Helen pleaded, knowing she had no luck. Then Wilbur fell on the ground and covered his eyes in desperation. He felt weak. He always been the one to protect Violet. From insults, beatings, every little thing. Now, he was so far away from her, he could no longer protect her. He could not help her, and for this, he felt ashamed and weak. He heard something odd next. He couldn't even say it, but as if an actual force field had been trying to come up. And then, he heard the explosion. Well, Carl ended the transmission and sat beside Wilbur, who was quietly sobbing, with his head buried in his knees. Carl patted him on the back, knowing this will no solve anything. In fact, he didn't understand why humans would pat each other's back. Then, an idea popped in his head. Hey, it's gonna be all right. Where's that positive, upbeat Wilbur Robinson I knew? Carl rhetorically asked. That Wilbur Robinson you knew had Violet Parr alive in his life. Wilbur responded, not even looking up. Well, if that Wilbur Robinson comes back and convinces Lewis to fix the time machine, he could go back in time and prevent the Parr family from going on that plane, Carl said. Wilbur suddenly looked up. He wiped his eyes and a grin quickly crept up his face. "You're right. You're right. Carl, you're a genius," he said, jumping up. "Well, I don't like to brag, but nothing. We can save Violet and her family, and we can save the future, too. This is great. We got a good plan. All Louis needs to do is fix the time machine," Wilbur said. Then he heard Louis say, "I think that's it. I did it. I knew you could." Wilbur grinned, running up to the time machine. Carl was impressed. When he saw Wilbur, he would have never suspected that the girl he's been denying his feelings for had died. Satisfied, Carl went upstairs. Wilbur knew this death was only temporary, so it didn't matter. "Nice work, my friend." But when Louis came in, and they started to go in the air a bit, it immediately started to fall apart. The engine kept on sputtering, and the time machine fell on the ground once more, with smoke coming out, and Louis and Wilbur were covered in smoke. Wilbur and Louis stared in awe at the broken time machine. No one wanted to break down and cry like Wilbur did at the moment, but at this point they couldn't afford to be negative. "Well, you know what they say. Keep moving." "Don't say it," Louis said frustratedly, getting out of the time machine. Wilbur sighed silently. It would take a bit longer, but they didn't have that much time as it is. He was about to say something, but his mother called for dinner. "Boys, dinner time!" "Not now, Mom." "If you're not up here in 5 minutes, I'm gonna come down there," she said. Louis and Wilbur glanced at each other. "We'd better get up there." At the table, Louis couldn't help but feel welcomed at this family, yet nervous at the same time. Sure, the family members were crazy, but Louis didn't mind one bit. As for Wilbur, he didn't want to be all smiles at dinner. He was upset the plan wasn't moving forward, and tried to think of a new idea. Then Carl motioned him to go underneath the table to talk. Why is the kid still here? Any of this ring a bell? Science fair? Memory scanner? A time stream that needs fixing? Temporary setback. Wilbur answered, "He's just having a little confidence issue. You want me to talk to him?" "No." "I give a mean back rub." "No." "Shiatsu?" "No." "Feng shui?" "No." Wilbur said, "I've got it under control." This was a lie, of course, but Wilbur knew that Carl panicking wasn't going to help. He was already worried enough as it is. "So, Louis, are you in Wilbur's class?" Franny asked. "No, yes." Wilbur, Louis answered in unison, then looked at each other again. "Yes, no." "Well," Wilbur thought quickie, "yes and no. Louis is a new transfer student." "Yeah," Louis said quickly. Wilbur, Carl, and Louis were impressed with Wilbur's sudden quick thinking. "So, where are you from?" "Canada," Louis said. "I think you mean North Montana." Tallulah chipped in. "It hasn't been called Canada in years." "Do you know Sam Gunderson?" Lucille asked. E=S a big country." Louis said sheepishly. "State," Tallulah corrected. Wilbur didn't listen to the next phrase of the conversation because he was trying to figure out a way to boost Louis's confidence. But how could he do that? Louis was already self-conscious enough as it is. The rest of the evening didn't came up so well either. Wilbur had well avoided Franny taking Louis's hat off, but he knew he just couldn't keep the charade for long. Then, the PB&J gun broke down, and Wilbur immediately smiled. "My friend Louis is an inventor. He can fix it." "Wilbur, you know I can't," Louis muttered. "Come on, give it a try." As the other family members pushes him, Louis did it. But all hope was lost when he failed. After pushing him, how much more could his confidence be lost? But then the family cheered for him for his failure. Wilbur sighed in relief. Then, suddenly, a huge dinosaur, which Louis had assumed was their pet, came through the Robinson home, trying to eat Louis for some reason. But Louis and Wilbur, and the whole family, managed to save Louis. "Are you boys all right?" Franny asked. "We're fine, Mom," Wilbur insisted. "Yeah, didn't you see us take out that dinosaur?" Louis said excitedly. "Oh man, it was so cool, Mom." Louis gasped after he heard what he had said. The whole family smiled lightly, except for Wilbur and Carl, who were panicking. I'm sorry, I didn't. Oh, Louis, it's okay. Franny insisted. Your head, Louis noticed. What? Franny touched her forehead and smiled lightly again. It's just a bruise, Louis. You all sacrifice so much for me, Louis said in disbelief. Well, of course. You are a special kid. Franny smiled, as the rest of the family agreed. Okay, you should get him out of here before something really bad happens, Carl whispered to Wilbur. Silly, silly robot. I've got it all under control. Wilbur smiled, standing up to the family. Okay, everybody. It's been a long, hard day filled with emotional turmoil and dinosaur fights. So why don't you all hit the hay? And Louis and me will get going. The rest of the family frowned. Do you have to go now? It is getting dark, Franny said. Maybe Louis could spend the night. Mom, maybe some other time, okay? Wilbur said. Well, anytime you want to come over, you just come over, Franny said. Mom, Wilbur said. Now, it was officially out of control. The truth is, we love having you. We really have to go, Wilbur insisted. No, Franny said, suddenly getting an idea. No, you don't. You have to stay. The whole family smiled once again. But Louis, Wilbur, and Carl stared in disbelief. Who would be a better family for you than us? What do you say, Louis? Do you want to be a Robinson? You want to adopt me? Louis asked, his eyes suddenly beaming with joy. He figured it would be great to have Wilbur as a brother, Franny as a mother. Well, a family. One that wouldn't make him feel stupid if one of his inventions blew up. Yeah, Franny smiled. Yes, Louis said brightly. Carl and Wilbur gasped. They thought Louis was smarter than this. What in the world was he doing? Wilbur had no choice. As cruel as it seemed, he took the cap off of Louis, revealing his hair, and the Robinsons gasped. Lies. Okay, it's true. I'm from the past. Now you know the big secret, Louis said, not thinking it was that big of deal. But on the contrary, Wilbur, what have you done? How could you bring him here? Franny panicked. That is an excellent question, Wilbur answered nervously. Please don't get mad at Wilbur, Louis said. He was just being a good friend. It took all the strength Franny had to say what she did. Her heart was breaking as she said these words. Louis, I am so sorry, but you have to go. What? You just said? I know what I said, Franny said miserably. Anne, sound familiar, Mrs. Parr? Louis shook his head. He didn't understand why they didn't want him anymore. It wasn't like anyone would miss him in the past. I'm from the past. So what? Louis, look at me. You're a great kid, and we would never do anything to hurt you, but I'm sorry. You have to go back to your own time? Yeah, about that, Wilbur said. One of the time machines is broken, and the other one was stolen by a guy with a bowler hat, which kind of explains the dinosaur. I'm calling your father, Franny said. Wait, if I have to leave, can I at least go back and find my mom? Wilbur promised, Louis said. You promised what? Franny said angrily. I was never going to do it, I swear, Wilbur insisted. You lied to me? Louis said angrily. No, yes, he admitted. Louis' eyes became teary, and he started to run away. Louis, wait! I can't believe I was dumb enough to actually believe you were my friend, he cried, running to the garden and sobbing. I am your friend, Wilbur called after him. He had felt horrible. Why didn't he listen to Violet and his dad? Why didn't he just leave the time machines be? Mister, you're grounded. Until you die. Chapter 7. Wilbur? Nothing was going well. Louis had found out he's really Wilbur's dad. Bowler hat guy stole the memory scanner. Wilbur had saved Louis, but lost Carl in the process. They had to act quick. It was now or never. Louis, you have to fix the time machine. No, I can't, Louis said. He didn't have enough time, and he was too shocked to think straight. What about your dad? You could call him. You are my dad, Wilbur said, pointing to him. But that's in the future. There won't be a future unless you fix the time machine, Wilbur insisted. He felt himself feel lighter, as if he could easily float away. Oh no, it was happening. Look, I messed up. I left the garage door unlocked, but I tried like crazy to fix things. But now, it's up to you. Louis shook his head hard. He wanted to tell himself it was a dream, and he'd wake up right now. A dream that seemed so real. But Louis was smarter than that. There was no use in little childish hopes when he knew perfectly well this was real, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Wilbur looked on the ground miserably. He had failed to fix the future, failed to save the Parr family, and failed to keep Carl alive. And he was paying for the price. It's all up to Louis now. You can do it, Dad, he whispered. Then as the storm drew closer, Wilbur felt himself vanish. Louis? Louis! Wilbur, Louis said, as Wilbur soon became a flash of life that was sucked into the sky. Wilbur, he said sadly. It was the middle of the night, but Violet woke up, only to see her brother hugging her. She pushed him away a bit and stood up. There was no guard or anything. So why did she wake up? She felt an eerie feeling inside of her, like something's changed in the blink of an eye. She didn't know what. She looked at her reflection in a puddle. She looked normal. She looked at Dash. He looked normal. Did something happen to Mom and Dad? No. She felt it was somebody else, as if this person had disappeared from the face in the earth. She looked around the sky, which seemed green. That wasn't normal. It wasn't blue with stars as it was a few seconds ago. Wait. Suddenly, she felt as if she'd forgotten someone. Was it a friend? No, Violet didn't have many friends. She had Curry, Starla, somebody else too, but who? Wilbur, she asked herself. Who was Wilbur? Violet didn't know who he was, but she felt this boy was important to her and that he was in danger. She got scared all of a sudden and looked around. She wrapped her arms around herself. She was frightened. Something bad was happening and she knew it. She didn't know what, but she sensed it. The worst part? She knew she couldn't do a thing about it. Chapter 8. I remember you. Wilbur sighed in relief as he watched the clear blue skies, the green grass, the smiling people and the bright-colored buildings. All this happened because Louis fixed the time machine in time. Wilbur didn't know his own father could be so, well, normal, considering the fact he practically reinvented the whole world. He didn't understand why his father didn't want to meet his mother too, but Wilbur figured it was for the best, though he still didn't understand. Right now, he was in the time machine and on his way at home, just to confirm to his mother that Louis got home safely. After this, Wilbur thought, everything will be back to normal. By this, he meant going back in time to prevent Violet from dying. But as he got closer to the buildings, the time machine started to break. So Wilbur landed on the Robinsons' Inc. roof and called his father, asking him to fix it. But as his father fixed it, he also had a favor to ask. Something's happening in the city, nearby where your friend Violet lives, Cornelius said. Wilbur frowned. Cornelius? No one, really, knew that Violet was dead. Not permanently, though. What is it? I don't know. Apparently some sort of weird plane landed, and there's an odd round thing in the middle of it. Crashed landed, and they said it has extraordinary deskins that are advanced, the technology only Robinsons Inc. would have. Do you mind taking a couple of pictures of it? Cornelius asked. What? Dad, I'm kinda in a hurry. Wilbur said, I need to return that time machine. Well, you can get it once you take those pictures. We need to know that no one is stealing our ideas, Cornelius said, handing him a camera. All right, fine, Wilbur said, running to the exit. Are we there yet? Dash asked. We get there when we get there, Bob said. How are you doing, honey? Do I have to answer? Helen yelled. She was holding a minivan together along a plane, so it's only natural she wouldn't want to talk. Violet stared outside the window. At least now she didn't have to brush her long hair out of her face. Like she used to. She had decided to keep her hair back. For some reason, she felt more confident, smarter, stronger, and dare she say prettier even than before. Ever since her mom told her when the time comes, she'll be ready, she's been feeling a lot more confident. She'd finally made a full-force field, without it breaking in a second or being tiny. She just didn't know if she could handle a whole plane yet, though. Maybe with this new confidence, did Violet dare to stand out? Like, wear the clothes she swore she'd never wear? Or finally being able to ask Tony out? Or making a lot more friends? And speaking of friends, she still hasn't found out who this boy— at least, she thinks it's a boy, who she used to know but somehow has forgotten. But she sort of remembers him a bit. She remembered his personality. She remembered some things, like he stood up for her when no one else would. He made her laugh when she was crying. He was dumb, but good-hearted. His sarcastic comments never bothered her. Violet's sarcastic comments to him didn't bother him either, and he was the one person who Violet could always be open with. She could be excited, happy, hyperactive, anything around him really. Violet shook her head. This boy must have been an imagination. If there was really someone like that, Violet would love him and not have a crush on Tony. Or maybe, what if he did exist? And Violet has never noticed he's everything she wants before. No, it couldn't be. Even if this boy was real, he was probably someone from the past. And he probably didn't like Violet anyway. As Helen let go of the plane, and Violet and Dash buckled up, Violet pressed the button and the minivan went to its fullest. Violet watched in amazement as her mother and father lost their directions. She laughed inside a bit. In a time full of troubles, dangers, mad scientists, villains willing to kill kids, and a robot destroying the city, their mom and dad still manages to act like a normal husband and wife. Finally, the rowdy ride caused the whole car to turn round. As they arrived to a parking spot, they shockingly made a perfect parking. Bob and Helen rubbed their heads. "Kids, are you okay?" "Super duper, Dad!" Violet laughed. She was glad she was able to, after thinking so much of this missing boy. "Let's do that again," Dash said. Bob and Helen smiled, but then they heard someone screaming. "Wait here and stay hidden," Bob ordered. "Well, what? I watch helplessly from the sidelines? I don't think so." Helen sneered. "I'm asking you to wait with the kids," Bob said frustratedly. Did Helen really not understand what was at stake here? He couldn't afford to mess up. "And I'm telling you, not a chance. You're my husband, I'm with you," Helen insisted. "For better or worse." "I have to do this alone," Bob said. Helen got angry. "What is this to you, playtime?" she snapped. "No." "So you can be Mr. Incredible again?" Helen asked. "No." "Then what? What is it?" Helen asked. "I'm not," Bob sighed. He couldn't believe he was admitting this. "Not what?" "Strong enough?" "Strong enough," Helen repeated. "And this will make you stronger?" "Yes." "No." Bob slapped his own forehead in frustration. "Then what is this? Some sort of workout?" "I can't lose you again," Bob yelled, shaking his wife for emphasis. I can't. I'm not strong enough." Violet smiled as she watched her parents kiss. She watched a boy who was passing behind them, with his mouth wide opened. Wilbur, she whispered. That's it. This was the boy she had forgotten. Her closest friend ever. How could she forget Wilbur? She remembered everything about him. Wilbur smiled open-mouthed at the sight of this girl. She looked like Violet, and this family, which he presumed was the girl's family since they were wearing matching suits, looked a lot like her parents. Violet laughed, knowing she'd forgotten him, and was about to call his name, until she yelled, looking up, "Oh, oh!" The robot's claw was underneath the minivan. Violet and Dash got out in time, and the Parr family, including many residents standing nearby, ran for cover. But a claw kept Violet and Dash from moving. "Inga, Vi, Dash, no!" Helen yelled, as the robot's claw was about to smash them. Everybody, including people who didn't know this family, caught their breaths. Two kids were about to get crushed. Dash held his head and closed his eyes, waiting for the claw to come but it didn't. He looked up and saw his sister, making a force field as the robot desperately tried to break into it. Everybody's mouth dropped. Supers? Actual superheroes? Wilbur recalled a moment before Violet's death. "Violet, you have to put a force field around the plane." These were the words of Helen Parr, moments before the plane had crashed. Wilbur wondered, could it be true? Was Violet really one of those legendary superheroes in hiding? Helen was proud, but also concerned. She's not going to hold it that long. Wilbur was right behind the two parents and widened his eyes. They had the exact same voices as Violet's parents? Could it be? "Well, what do I do?" Bob asked. "Wait, Mr. Incredible?" Wilbur asked behind Bob, who replied barely looking at him. "Not now, kid." It was Mr. Incredible. He had a family. Wilbur watched as the robot replaced its claw with its whole body and knocked Violet out cold. "Violet!" Wilbur yelled. Bob and Helen looked at him and realized it was Wilbur. Wilbur glanced at them angrily. "Well, don't just stand there, Mr. Incredible. Go underneath the robot and keep it from smashing Violet and Dash, those kids." Bob didn't hesitate and ran towards the robot and grabbed the robot before it would hit Violet and Dash. Meanwhile, Wilbur apologized to Helen. "Sorry, IT quote S just, that girl really looks like a friend of mine," he said sadly. "It's all right," Helen said. Why did he seem so sad? Helen ran towards her kids and grabbed Violet as she and Dash ran for cover. "I'm fine, Mom, really?" Violet insisted, so Helen let her go behind an alley. "Stay here, okay?" Helen said as she ran to help her husband. Wilbur was hiding behind that alley and stared at the girl in amazement. She was so beautiful. Even with a mask, Wilbur could tell she was probably one of the most beautiful girls around. She looked like Violet and sounded like her. Wilbur sat there, open-mouthed behind Violet and Dash, who didn't notice a thing because they were watching their parents and parents' friend fight. Violet noticed something about that odd white glove. "The remote controls the robot," she said. "Really? Looks like Dad could use a little help." Dash smirked. "He said to stay here," Violet reminded him. Wilbur's opened even more wider. If it was possible, this was exactly like Violet. "So," Dash yelled, running, "Dad, throw it, throw it!" "Come back," Violet yelled. But Mr. Incredible yelled, "Go long!" Violet sighed. At least Dash didn't ruin anything. Violet watched helplessly from the sidelines. She hated this. A mother with an elastic body, a father with super strength, and a brother who could outrun a race car. And all she had was invisibility and force fields. Big deal! Violet instantly knew she'd probably be the weakest of the family. At least, she hopes not. Wilbur kept on staring at her, and his belief of her being Violet kept on increasing. No. Impossible. Violet died. Didn't she? Wilbur looked at the girl and tapped her shoulder. "I'm sorry, have we met?" Violet smiled at Wilbur. She was just so happy to see him. She didn't care about that broken promise. The important thing is, she remembers who he is and he's okay. She wanted to jump and hug him, but she had to keep her cool. "No," she lied. "I'm Invisigirl." Violet smiled at her quick-thinking lie. Invisigirl. She thought, not bad, Violet, not bad. In fact, she was surprised she was suddenly able to lie so well. "Oh, you look like my friend, Violet Parry." Wilbur smiled sadly at her name. "After this, she'll be back. She died in some plane crash." He didn't mean to blurt that one out. Violet was confused. Did Wilbur think she was dead? "Hey, why do you think that?" "My robot got the information. He got a transmission from Violet's mother. He heard a crash," Wilbur said sadly. Violet smiled sympathetically and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, I promise you this. In a couple of hours from now, you're going to feel better." "Really?" Wilbur asked. "You think so?" Violet nodded. "I know so. Now, are you going to be safe here alone?" she asked. "Yeah, I am." He smiled back. Violet glanced behind her. Looks like they weren't finding any luck with getting the remote. It was up to her. Good. I have to go. Nice meeting you, Wilbur. She smiled, shaking his hand and turning invisible. Wilbur nodded happily. Wait, he didn't recall telling her his name. Chapter 9. You've got a lot to explain. Violet Parr. What Wilbur had witnessed was simply amazing. Says he had stayed and watched the fight along with some citizens who were hidden. This new superhero group, including a seemingly solo superhero Frozone, saved the whole city. Wilbur was enjoyed to be part of the citizens and clapped along with them when they saved the city. A lot of people were hooting. Wilbur smiled and decided to go along. You rock Invisigirl, he yelled, before bursting out laughing. Violet blushed, then chuckled. She was waving thanks to everyone, then gave a little wave to Wilbur. Wilbur smiled as well, but as the crowd started to gather, Wilbur had disappeared. Violet was disappointed to see him go, but she figured she'd call him later on anyway, just to confirm she didn't die. Wilbur took a detour from Robinson's Inc. He walked over to Violet's house instead. He didn't know why he wanted to cutting up old wounds, but something inside him just told him to go, and he wouldn't be disappointed. It was one of those strong feelings he rarely got, so he followed it, and he had a lot on his mind. Talking to Invisigirl ... T felt so much like he was talking to someone he's known for years. He couldn't quite explain it, though. Was it because she reminded him so much? Maybe too much of Violet? And the name. How'd she know his name if he never told her? It didn't make any sense. And she couldn't have been Violet. Violet was dead. So why did Wilbur have the strong feeling Violet was alive? Why did Invisigirl look and sound so much like Violet? Why did Invisigirl's family look like Violet's family? Why did Invisigirl sound so sure that Wilbur will feel better in a couple of hours from now? How did Invisigirl know his name when he didn't even tell it to her? So many questions entered Wilbur's mind that he didn't notice the family in front of him. He gasped and hid behind the bush at the next door neighbors. The same superhero family in front of Violet's house. And a crashed plane and limo was about to fall on them. Wilbur was far enough to avoid it, but his instincts told him to run and save them. He tried to run, but his shirt was caught onto a thorn of the bush. No, he thought, I won't lose you again, Violet. I mean, Invisigirl, But by the time he broke free, the fire had already landed on the family. Wilbur put a hand on his face. He had failed once again. Wait, what was that sound? He looked up, and Invisigirl made a force field around the family. Wilbur smiled, but then slowly crept behind the next neighbor's bush, then at the Parr house's bush. He figured if they didn't know he was there, they would say more information about their identities. That's my girl. Helen smiled at Violet. Dash looked behind him, so Wilbur hid. Dash looked sad as he saw the broken-down home. Does this mean we have to move again? Bob just patted Dash's back and started to laugh, along with the family. Wilbur chuckled as well, but then realized he was trying to keep it low. So he shut up. Then, some kid with a tricycle spoke up in front of them. Wow, that was totally wicked, he said excitedly, throwing his arms up. Helen chuckled. All right, little boy, time to go home. She smiled. Oh, okay, Mrs. Incredible, the boy said sadly, cycling away. It's Elastigirl, sweetie. Helen smiled, then glanced at Bob. Don't think I'm changing my name to Mrs. Incredible. Violet chuckled and stood in front of the family. Okay, everyone, it's been a hard day filled with family fun time, near-death experiences, psychopathic grudge holding evil geniuses, and robot fights. What do you say we all go eat dinner now like a normal family would? Wilbur was stunned that Violet stood to her family like that, with no fear or no stutter in her voice. Oh wait, this isn't Violet, he reminded himself. Helen smiled at her daughter proudly. It was unbelievable to believe this spunky superhero who said, "We're not going anywhere," when her mother told her to leave, who was outgoing and open used to be her daughter. Helen knew that Violet was still shy, but it was nice to see Violet being able to act like her family was. Well, her family, and not a couple of strangers she was forced to be with. The Parr family watched the skies for a while, trying to regain their focus, and smiled. Violet especially knew that for her and her family, this was a whole new beginning. She knew that from now on, people would see the Violet Parr she'd been so afraid to show. She'd show the Violet Parr only Wilbur Robinson knew. She promised herself she'd stand up more, not be so afraid of life. Please, after all, when you're a superhero who just almost got killed by villains who would dare shoot a child, a round, high-tech robot and slightly psychopathic grudge-holding evil genius, those are scarier than silly little things, like not being able to fit in or scared to show your true self. Well, I guess we'll all have a secret to keep. Helen smiled. Yeah, and it's going to stay a secret, Bob said, then turning to Dash. Won't it, Dash? What? So I can't tell people I'm a superhero? Dash whined. I'll never be able to keep that secret. Yeah, you would, Violet said. Besides, just think of it as another one of average little secrets. It's not as if no one has any secrets anyway. Certainly not you, Vi. A voice behind them said. They froze and slowly turned around and saw Wilbur leaning to the fence. Wilbur, Violet said, shocked. You've got a lot to explain, Violet Parr, Wilbur said. About an hour later, when the Parr family put normal clothes on, Violet explained everything that had happened to Wilbur. Wilbur listened to every word of her adventure. Turns out she didn't die, but survived the crash. Wilbur smiled. At least he didn't have to go back in time anymore. Bob and Dash went to the park, trying to find ways to play sports without showing off. So here we are, Violet explained. Wilbur rubbed his chin. He didn't know how to take this news. So his best friend's a superhero. Did this change things much? He was worried about Violet's newfound confidence, as Helen put it, and he had hoped she'd stay the same. A superhero, Wilbur said. Wait, is this why you fainted during PE a few weeks ago? Yeah, my new force field skills were kicking in. When a superhero gets a new power, it pretty much hurts us for a while. I'm not even going to tell you what happens if we use an extreme amount of our powers. What do you mean, extreme amount of your powers? Wilbur asked curiously. Well, for example, you have to grow into your powers. Like a few weeks ago, I couldn't make a full force field. They were all small, or would disappear in an instant. I had to train to get them to work. You can usually do it when you train. Like when I made my first full force field, my brother's life was at stake. I was kind of surprised I could do it, but I guess it was from all the training I did in the cave that night. But if I did put that force field around the plane, when I wasn't ready, I would have collapsed. Or died, Violet said. What? How can you die from that? Wilbur asked. Well, excuse me, Mr. Normal. The powers come from your brain. Now imagine putting how can I explain this? Imagine making a force field from your mind around a huge airplane. You do know that that hurts, right? I'm still getting used to force fields around myself. The biggest force field I can probably do for now is a car. Okay, Supergirl. Don't go all snappy, Wilbur said, putting his hands out. Oh, please. Supergirl's got nothing on me. The only reason she's so popular and well-liked is because she's Superman's niece. But big deal. My father beats Superman and Supergirl put together. Minus the flying, Violet claimed. Okay, fine. Invisigirl. Wilbur smirked. I think I'm gonna keep that name. Anyways, can we talk about this super stuff another time? Well, okay, but it's not every day you find out your best friend is a butt-kicking superhero. But okay, so what did your mom mean when she said that you got this new personality? Wilbur asked. Well, I feel like I can do anything. Like, do things I was so afraid to do. I don't know. I just feel stronger. Violet smiled. Stronger as in, I can now put a force field without it disappearing stronger, or I feel like I can show everyone the true me stronger? Wilbur asked. A little bit of the second one, but I feel like I can be more daring. You know, being a superhero, there's gotta be scarier things than just so worried to fit in. Violet said, I have to admit, I lied to you too. I told you I asked Tony out, but I didn't yet, Violet said guiltily. It's fine. I knew you weren't ready to. Just ask him when you want to the most, Wilbur said. Well, that's it. I was thinking maybe I could ask him out instead, Violet said. Wilbur's sweat dropped. He knew he had to tell her his feelings, but he didn't want to say it. But as usual, his voice betrayed him and talked before he could think. Before he could say you, he put his hand over his mouth. Violet looked at him in shock. Was he about to say what I think he was going to say? She thought to herself, and felt her heart punching her chest uncontrollably. No, Violet. You don't love him, she thought to herself over and over again. I love that plan of yours. It's a great idea. Except, why don't you wait to see if you can get him to ask you out? I mean, I'm pretty sure you and I both know you can get him to ask you out, Wilbur said. Once again, his quick thinking saved him. That's a great idea, Violet said excitedly. This is the best idea you ever had, Will. Oh, no offense. Trust me, it's not the best, Wilbur said, thinking of his Back to the Past adventure. Now that you told me your secret, I got a secret to tell you myself. Chapter 10. 3 months later. It has been 3 months since Violet has told Wilbur about her powers. 3 months since she's given up on Tony, and 3 months that she has been a superhero with her family. So far, no one's even begun to conclude that Violet, no matter how much her new look came, was actually Invisigirl in disguise. Not that Violet minded. She couldn't even begin to imagine what would happen if they knew. Her family was closer, and now a normal, well, almost normal family. At least they weren't as dysfunctional as they used to be. Violet is still the same person she was a few months ago, and this is what she loved best. Just a bit more daring. The only downer for the past few months is her unsorted feelings on Wilbur. A few months ago, she had forgotten who Wilbur was for a brief few hours. She knew this was because of Wilbur has been erased from existence for a while, but she does remember that though she had forgotten who Wilbur was, she had dreamed about him, and she had once believed someone that perfect couldn't exist, because she would be in love with him. And Violet had thought about it for the past 3 months. Did she really love Wilbur? For the moment, she was unbelievably confused. Was it even right to love him? Can someone really fall in love just like that? Violet was certainly realistic, and did not believe in true love at first sight, or suddenly falling in love. But maybe, nearly losing Wilbur made her realize there might be such a thing. Things weren't exactly any easier for Wilbur either. He had tried to suppress his feelings for Violet, telling himself he could have any girl he wants, yet he knew that the one girl he truly wanted didn't even notice his feelings. He was glad for Violet, glad that she was more confident, and people were finally noticing her. Not to mention the fact that Cornelius heard about the Parr's money trouble and allowed Bob to be the top security guard at Robinson's Inc. But there was a problem about the past 3 months. More guys were noticing her. She had a few offers, but turned them down. This was a good sign that old Violet was still there. He knew very well she wasn't the type of girl to date guys who were in it just to go out with her for a few days, then dump her. But after 3 months, Wilbur decided it was time. So, I'm going to tell her. Wilbur told Starla and Sean, both friends of him and Violet, who were going out with each other, and all 3 of them were at a fast food place. Tell her? As in, tell her? Starla asked in disbelief. So you're finally admitting it? Yes, okay, I'm out of denial. But the thing is, I'm afraid about how she's going to react, Wilbur said. Trust me, she's going to love it, Sean said, taking a bite out of his burger. Think so? Wilbur asked. Sure. I mean, you and Violet have been great friends for so long. You were meant to be. And once you do, can you even begin to imagine how close you two are going to be? I swear you guys get together. Me and Starla might have a new competition for favorite couple in school. Sean smirked. Well, not a close one. Starla joked. I just don't want Violet to act awkwardly. I don't expect her to feel the same. I just hope she won't be weirded out after. Wilbur explained. Well, don't worry. She's going to feel the same. Trust me. I know, Starla said with unusual confidence. Why? What makes you so sure? Wilbur asked. Can't you see it? You and Violet are practically an Oscar-winning movie plot waiting to happen. Think about it. Shy, quiet, smart, secretly pretty girl befriends an outgoing, loud, idiotic, but handsome boy. Years later, the boy falls for the girl, but doesn't want to tell her because she's obsessed with another guy. The girl is confused about her feelings at first, and then finally realizes he's the one she's been looking for, Starla said dreamingly, with stars in her eyes. Sean and Wilbur stared at her awkwardly. Anyways, in short, you and Violet are meant to be. I say go for it and go for it now. Wilbur gave him an odd look. Now, she's at some track meet. So, ask her to the movies. Come on, it's perfect. Let's go. You, Starla, you warm Violet up and try not to fade away from the relationships topic like you do, Sean warned. Starla had an unusual habit of slowly following a conversation when it is changed and immediately forgetting the other. I'll be hiding, and you, Wilbur, will come to Violet. Sean, I don't. No time to talk, Robinson. Let's move. Move, move, he yelled, grabbing Starla and Wilbur by their wrists and rushing them out of the fast burger. Violet stared at the cheerleaders from her school, cheerleading at her brother's elementary track course. She looked at them in annoyance, barely able to understand why they were there. So, the head cheerleader was particularly giving Violet the evil eye for a while. She didn't know why. She barely knew the head cheerleader. Just by reputation, she knew that the cheerleader was Tina Turso, who used to date Tony. But Violet had never really given it a second thought. She looked over and saw Starla coming in. She quickly joined her friend downstairs at the entrance. Hey, Starla, she greeted. Oh, Violet, goody. I was supposed to look for you. Listen, I have to tell you something, Starla said immediately. Really? What? Violet asked. Well, it's... Starla stopped in her tracks once she saw the cheerleaders. Meanwhile, Sean was watching from the seats that were just over the entrance and slapped his forehead. Starla was changing subjects. What are they doing here? Starla asked in disgust. I mean, it's bad enough we see them at school. Why are they at your 10-year-old brother's track race? I know. As soon as I came in, I didn't get it either. I mean, do we really have to have cheerleaders at the track meet? I mean, what is that all about? Violet wondered. Stick to the subject? Sean whispered over Starla, but she didn't hear. Oh. He thought, trouble ahead. Meanwhile, Wilbur smiled as he saw Starla and Violet talking. He had only hoped Starla didn't change subjects as she tended to do. He had approached them, careful not to startle either one of them. Well, I always thought it was more like... Starla was trying to answer, but someone rudely interrupted. Hey, Tony said. Hey, Violet said even if she thought it was a bit rude, he interrupted her. You're, Violet, right? Tony asked. That's me. Violet nodded. Starla started panicking once she saw Tony. It wasn't supposed to be like this. If only she hadn't changed subjects again. See you, Vi, she said, quickly walking away. Violet didn't even get a chance to say bye. She turned her head to Tony. You look different, he commented. No, duh. She looks different. She's wearing pink. She is wearing pink because she made a promise to herself she'd wear clothes she hated. And she's wearing her hair back, too. Now, do you notice her riding der? Wilbur thought angrily, hiding in the shadows of the entrance. I feel different. Is different okay? Violet asked him. Of course it is, Wilbur thought. Hey, difference, great. So, would you... Yeah, Violet asked, eager for him to speak. Do you think maybe... Yeah? Violet said, but got annoyed Tony couldn't speak. Shh, I like movies. I'll buy the popcorn, okay? Violet smiled that she started to leave with a smirk in herself. She had actually made Tony Ridinger stutter. She looked over, and Tony was still talking. Movie popcorn, so, yeah. Hey, so Friday? He asked. Friday? She nodded as she sat down. Tony smiled and started to leave the track and saw a visibly angry Wilbur Robinson, leaning to the wall and crossing his arms, giving him an icy death glare. Tony stopped for a moment, studying Wilbur's body language, which clearly said, "I so want to punch you right now." "So, going out with Violet, huh?" Wilbur asked, getting off the wall and started circling Tony. Yeah," Tony said, uncomfortable by Wilbur's sudden seriousness. "Uh-huh. Well, she's my best friend. So you break her heart, I'm gonna have to break your face." "Ridinger?" Wilbur threatened. Tony gulped and nodded and started to walk away, trying not to remember Wilbur Robinson's reputation of hurting anyone who even tries to hurt his friends. Wilbur was still glaring. He couldn't decide what he wanted to do more. Let it all out, bang his own head against the wall for being too late, or beat up Ridinger. Honestly, he knew he wanted to let it all out more. In truth, Ridinger was probably not going to break Violet's heart. He was way too nice. Ridinger was just a guy who noticed Violet's beauty, and like any other guy, asked her out. Wilbur sat down, holding his knees against him. So, if he wasn't at a public place, he would have cried. If he wasn't suddenly too weak to move, he would have ran to the nearest place he could have hidden away from the world. Suddenly, he stood up, hearing footsteps, and saw the Parr family leaving, with Dash holding a trophy. "Hey, Wilbur, look," Dash said, running fast, since he could in front of Wilbur and no one was watching, and showed Wilbur his trophy. "I won! Can you believe it? I won!" "Yeah, you won. That is a big surprise." Wilbur smirked. He tried his best not to look upset. "Yeah, it is a big surprise." Dash smirked back. "Dash, come on. Nobody likes a sore winner." Violet smiled. "Nobody likes a modest winner either." Wilbur said, "Wilbur, I'm surprised you're not at home getting ready for that dinner your dad's preparing," Bob stated. Wilbur gave a blank look, then slapped his own forehead. "That stupid dinner! I forgot. All of his top employees are coming, and I'm going to have to entertain those stupid kids of the employees. Mr. Parr, Mrs. Parr, Vi, Dash, please tell me you guys are coming." "Yeah, we are, except if a little traffic hits us again." Helen smirked. Traffic was the new word for whenever another supervillain would come and threaten the city, and they had to beat them, and this would make them a little late. Right. Well, I suppose I gotta get going," Wilbur said. "Still have to pick up some stuff." "You don't need a ride?" Bob asked. "No, I'm fine," Wilbur said. "See you tonight." Wilbur practically ran outside of the stadium, and Violet wondered why he was so eager to leave. She'd have to check with that later. "Wilbur seems a bit jumpy," Helen remarked. Yeah. I have no idea why." Violet wondered. It was hard to be excited she's going on a date with Tony Ridinger when Wilbur was acting weird. "Maybe it has something to do with you going out with Tony?" Bob wondered out loud, sort of teasing Violet. "He doesn't even know I'm going out with Tony," Violet exclaimed. "Ooh, a love circle between Violet, Wilbur, and Tony," Dash said, cupping his hands and imitating a narrator's voice. Previously on Violet's love life, Tony asks Violet out. Wilbur is jealous. Who will she choose? Okay, first off, it's called a love triangle. And second, how can Wilbur be jealous of Tony if he doesn't even know he asked me out yet? Violet asked. Dash just rolled his eyes. Whatever. Two guys like you. Violet and Tony sitting on a tree. And then Wilbur pushes him off the tree. Dash sang tauntingly. Okay, enough annoying your sister, Bob said, grabbing Dash and putting him over his shoulders. Nice work at the race, Dash, he congratulated. He wasn't exactly comfortable knowing his daughter was between a love triangle. If he were a normal dad, he would have thought Wilbur was a bad influence on Violet. But he wasn't so normal, was he? And he didn't think that at all. He just thought Wilbur was a boy enjoying his life. Well, he still can. And if anyone knows the feeling of wanting to enjoy life while he can, it was Bob. Seems. Violet was relieved her father changed the subject quickly, and both her and Helen started the gush over Dash's victory. I didn't know what the heck you wanted me to do. Dash laughed. Suddenly, They felt something rumbling beneath them and saw in front another villain, claiming he was the Underminer. As he started his speech, the Parr family put their masks on, all smirking, ready for battle. Looks like they were going to hit traffic after all. Chapter 11. Meeting Rachel, Lauren Woods. Mom, do I have to wear this penguin suit? Wilbur whined. It itches. Wilbur, please try not to make a big fuss. The last big party we had was a mess. Franny said, but was interrupted. Punched some guy because he called Violet a geek. He deserved it, Wilbur insisted. In his mind, he had done the right thing by punching him. Of course, this thought went a little bit differently in the Robinsons' mind. Yes, and that's why Daddy didn't get the apple deal. But this time, more kids your age are coming. Not just you, Vi and some other rich child. These are really important kids, and you have to take care of each and every one of them, Franny said. What? I did not agree to that, Wilbur cried. Wilbur, try not to make this party difficult. It's a miracle I got all the relatives to promise they'll stay out of the way, Franny sighed. Wilbur groaned as Franny left to prepare more things for the party. Wilbur kept on fidgeting in this new penguin suit. He knew he certainly wasn't going to enjoy entertaining the guests, especially the teens. Wilbur knew that rich people would come. And whoever has rich kids, the kids are certain to be spoiled and bratty. About an hour later, a few guests started coming in. Wilbur sat boredly in a chair, watching the adults making conversation. The living room itself was practically a ballroom. A few of the teens came in, but they were more interested in trying to convince Wilbur to show them the newest laptops and such. One girl was particularly annoying. Rachel Lauren Woods, a girl Wilbur's age with brown blondish hair and a black and pink dress, who kept on trying to grab Wilbur's interest. But so far, Wilbur didn't have the heart or the energy to say, "Bug off, you're annoying me." "You know what? I think it's nice of your family to do this dinner," Rachel said, putting her hand on his shoulder. But Wilbur tried to brush her off. Finally, the Parr family came. They all burst out of the door, Bob and Dash in suits, and Jack in his usual red suit, Helen wearing an elegant white gown, and Violet wearing a purple dress and wearing her hair back, with wavy hair. Wilbur bit his lip nervously, trying not to get his mouth to fall on the ground as he saw Violet. It was the first time he saw her with wavy hair. He watched as Violet politely greeted his parents. She seemed happy. Why wouldn't she? The guy of her dreams just asked her out. Oh no, she's happy. I have to look happy too, Wilbur thought. He looked over at Rachel, who was still babbling to him, and quickly put his arm around her and laughed. Oh really? That's hilarious. Wilbur laughed, trying to look happy. Rachel was confused, but laughed too, putting her arm around him. Violet saw Wilbur and Rachel and felt sick inside her, but decided to keep her smile and approach them. Will, Violet smiled, waving at him. Oh, hi, Vi. Didn't even notice you there. Wilbur lied. This is Rachel. Rachel Lauren Woods. Yeah, I know, Violet said, smiling, but her tone clearly said she was upset. You know her? Wilbur asked. Violet sat down and explained how she knew Rachel Lauren Woods. The truth was, she didn't want to be around Rachel. Rachel was smart, nice, pretty, and even if she was only 13, had started a charity fund for poor kids. She started doing this when she was 6, going door to door in houses asking for money for various charity cases. Being around Rachel made Violet feel uneasy about herself. Violet couldn't exactly call herself a great role model, but Rachel was, as dubbed by various magazines, Miss Perfect. It wasn't a nickname for Rachel. It was a title. To Violet, whenever she would read Teen Beat magazine, she'd often think of Rachel as too perfect, even going as far as considering Rachel was secretly one of Syndrome's robots. Wow, pretty impressive. Of course she's impressive. She's my #1 girl, Wilbur said proudly, holding Rachel closer to him, making Violet a bit uneasy. #1 girl? Violet thought. I thought that was me. Thank you, Wilbur. Violet, you must be thirsty. Want to get a drink? Rachel asked. Sure. Violet smiled. It was a half smile, truly. She felt like she gained a friendship in Rachel, even though she felt odd seeing Rachel and Wilbur so close. Wilbur's smile immediately vanished as Violet and Rachel left. He didn't really enjoy calling Rachel his number one girl. He sighed, putting a hand on his forehead, wondering what his next step should be. Before, he had planned on confessing to Violet he loves her tonight. But that was ruined now, wasn't it? He didn't only felt wrong about replacing Violet, but he felt wrong for making Rachel believe he was interested. He felt someone sitting next to him. He turned his head and saw none other than Parr. Wow, I never thought someone could be dumber about girls than me. But here you are. Dash laughed, going underneath the table rapidly and sitting in front of Wilbur. What's that supposed to mean? Wilbur asked, offended. It means you tried making the stupid, idiotic mistake of trying to make Violet jealous. Dash said, in case you haven't noticed, the jealousy plan doesn't work. A lot of guys think it does, but it never does. It only makes things worse. I am not doing the jealousy plan, Wilbur exclaimed. Oh, please. I saw you see Violet the second we came in. And I know you know about Tony. And I don't know how you know, but I know you know about Tony. And now that I know, tell me how you know, Dash said. Wilbur couldn't answer at first. He tried to connect all the you-knows first, and shook his head as soon as he got it. Okay, yes, I know. Violet didn't see me, but I was right behind her when Tony asked her. But I am not jealous. Yeah, you are. It's so obvious you like my sister, Dash said. Wilbur rolled his eyes. I do not. Whatever. All I know is, you need to know this. The more you try to make it seem as if this Rachel girl was your number one girl, Violet will think you really mean it and stop being your friend. You'll drift apart. You might not believe me, but it's true. I've seen it happen with my own eyes with my own friends once. Dash warned him before he ran away. Wilbur was confused. He looked over to Violet and Rachel. Rachel was laughing over something Violet had said, and Violet smiled along. Seemed like they were being friends, which is why he felt so awful for using Rachel and hurting Violet. He knew Violet didn't have much friends, and losing him would devastate her. He had two choices. 1, give up on him and Violet completely, or 2, give the jealousy plan a shot. If he didn't try, he might be the one losing Violet to Tony. If he did try, Violet might lose him to Rachel. Unfortunately, he chose to try. Chapter 12. Violet's Heartbreak. The rest of the night came out as a blur when Violet and her family drove back home that night. Violet was confused about Rachel. Did she like her? Did she hate her? Violet found it difficult to hate a girl like Rachel. Rachel was nice to her, so she doesn't know what to expect from her. Violet couldn't hide the fact she was upset about Rachel and Wilbur's sudden relationship. Rachel was so happy she finally got Wilbur to notice her that she barely noticed in the end of the night. Violet once again wore her hair in front, hiding her saddened face. And Wilbur noticed this, and it killed him. But he had to try, shouldn't he? He really should have listened to Dash's advice. Days had passed, and Violet felt more distant from Wilbur every day. Every day seemed like time had gone slower. Violet would see Wilbur and Rachel, his arm around her shoulders, passing right through her. Wilbur hadn't noticed he was drifting apart. And Violet would spend time with Tony. In fact, Tony was great to hang out with. After school, they would go to the park. Tony would occasionally hold her hand. Only 3 people have noticed the whole thing, and are helpless and can't do anything about it. Violet and Wilbur's friends, Starla and Ricky, and Violet's brother, and Wilbur's partner in crime, Dash. They have all seen Violet become slowly quieter, and shyer and more distant once again. Sure, she wore some of her clothes that she would have worn with her new personality, but her hair stood in front now, never at the back. Friday night came, and Violet vowed to forget Wilbur and Rachel for just a couple of hours and focus on her and Tony. It was a little bit chilly, so Violet wore black flat heels boots, jean skirt, white shirt, green brownish jacket, and a pink scarf. She decided to put her hair back with a white headband because it created a little illusion that she was happy, at least. When Tony came to pick her up, it started good enough. The usual, "you look great" compliments, the "how are you doings" and all that. But instead of driving to the cinema, he drove somewhere else. And Violet became confused. "Tony, where are we going?" Violet asked. "I hope you don't mind, but I promised a friend we'd stop by," Tony answered. "Stop by? Stop by for what?" Violet asked. Tony didn't answer, but gave a brief smile. The same smile that Violet thought would get her mind off of Wilbur, but he came across her mind again. Violet just realized she had actually preferred Wilbur's conniving, mischievous but heartwarming smile to Tony's Prince Charming smile fit for an actor. "Get over it, Vi," she thought to herself. He doesn't feel the same, but Tony does. Don't blow it. As the car approached a cul-de-sac filled with rich kids who like to show off, Wilbur's house, however, wasn't located that far from here. They went to a house filled with lights, noise, and above all, teens who were going crazy and pushing each other into pools, and the front porch was filled with people talking. "Hope you don't mind. Brad's parents are out for the weekend, and he always does this amazing party. He'd be crushed if I didn't come," Tony explained. "Actually, Violet stuttered, looking around. It was everything she had wanted to avoid. A rich teenagers' party, whose parents are out of town and everyone going crazy. She remembered then. She had promised Wilbur she'd never go to a party like this. Being as protective as he was, he knew parties like those would end up with something bad. Forget him, Violet's mind told her. And unfortunately, Violet followed. "Sure, I don't mind." Violet smiled. Tony smiled back. He got out of the car and opened the door for Violet. Once Violet got out, she instantly felt danger coming in, but she ignored it. What a stupid move! She was a superhero. Her danger instincts are usually very accurate, but of course, when it came to teen parties, Violet didn't understand what could possibly happen. But she couldn't help but feel nervous, though. Here she was, in a tacky for movie date clothes, and the other girls were in attractive fancy clothes. It was as if there were a prom in here. All eyes were on her, and usually she didn't mind. But she minded this time. It was like a few days ago, when everyone had learned of Violet and Tony's date. Everyone stared at her and whispered. This time, everyone in the front porch stared at her and laughed. Violet shrugged it off, figuring it was no big deal. Teenage girls were known for laughing with no reason, after all. Then she looked further. More people laughed. She started to wonder if she had some sort of zit, or if it was her clothing that made them laugh. She didn't think so. After all, she just saw her own reflection in the car window, and she was fine. And as for her wearing normal clothes, so was Tony. What could have been so hilarious? She turned to Tony, who kept a smile so confident. "Wow, this party's so cool," Violet exclaimed as she took a peek inside the house, filled with lights, a disco ball, music. Once they got under the disco ball, Violet stopped and stared in awe. "I know." Tony smiled. "You know, Brad can wait. You want to dance first?" Tony held out his hand, and Violet was reluctant at first, but accepted. Violet chuckled. It was just all so amazing. Everything was. She didn't understand how something so amazing could be bad. The lights turned dark blue, and it looked as if the couples were dancing in the moonlight. The music fit perfectly, and you could hardly see anything wrong going on. "You really are enjoying, aren't you?" Tony asked. "Yes, I am." Violet blushed. "But I'm kind of underdressed." "No, the others are just overdressed." Tony laughed, and Violet followed. After she stopped laughing, Violet gave a bright smile. "Thanks for bringing me here. You've helped me more than you think." And it was true. Though it has only been less than 5 minutes, Violet felt like Wilbur didn't even exist. She hardly remembered she was in a crisis. But then, as the song nearly ended, Tony started to lean in for a kiss. Violet almost froze. Was she truly ready for her first kiss? No, of course she wasn't. But then again, how bad could it be? Violet knew she would like the idea of telling herself later in life. My first kiss was with Tony Ridinger. It wouldn't be so bad. So Violet leaned back. Their lips were so close. But before they could actually kiss, a booming laugh was heard. Tony's friends' laughs. Then Tony pulled his head back before they could kiss, and his heartwarming smile was transformed into a heartbroken frown. Is something wrong? Violet asked. No, of course not. Tony stuttered. As Tony's friends came closer, he couldn't take it. He grabbed Violet's shoulders and stopped her right there. Listen, Vi, I'm really sorry. Sorry? Sorry for what? You didn't do anything, Violet said innocently. You actually did it, man. Brad laughed. You did it! Ridinger, you dog. I owe you $100, but it was so worth it. Violet could have sworn she heard a bell ring, or something in her head that came crashing down. $100? What does he mean by that? Oh, sweetheart, Johnny said, wrapping his arm around her shoulder. You didn't really think Ridinger wanted to date you, right? What? Violet, I swear. Things changed. I wanted to go back on that, but... Tony said, trying to speak, but his friends kept on interrupting him. But what? Violet said, shivering. She thought she knew the answer, but she was afraid that the answer wouldn't be incorrect. You thought he wanted to date you on his own termies. Brad laughed. Get it in your head, Parr. It was a bet. A bet. Brad's words echoed through Violet's mind. That wasn't all. She heard the laughter, the mocking, Tony's seemingly honest words. She felt her heart beating, which was strange, because she wasn't aware the heart could still beat once it was broken. Yeah, we dared Ridinger to go out with you. I mean, I didn't think he was going to do it, but man, it looked so real. Johnny laughed. Violet felt her eyes watering up, and though she was in a crowd full of people, her eyes were on Tony only. Her eyes were filled with betrayal, sorrow, hurt, and Tony's eyes seemed vacant, as if he wasn't sure what was happening. Violet felt the world transform like a ghost, except for Tony, who was perfectly clear. In this time of betrayal and mockery against her, Violet had only one thing to say. How could you? Violet whispered. Tony himself looked as if he was about to tear up. It all changed, I swear. You became a new person. You were different. You were... Shut up, Violet whispered. Violet, please don't shut me out. It wasn't for the bet. It was because... Leave me alone, Violet yelled, pushing Tony away and running away from the house. She felt her tears falling on the ground, and it was almost as if she couldn't breathe. Her whole energy seemed to be wasted on crying, and what was worst is that everybody was laughing as she ran away. She felt something drop on her shoulder, then her head. It was raining. Lightning and thunder could soon be heard, and Violet heard screams from the house as everyone went inside. But she didn't care. She kept running. She didn't know where, but all she knew is that she was running away from Tony, and that was all that mattered. She ran to a part of town she's never seen. She lost energy and let herself fall in an alley, burying her head in her hands and crying. She punched the wall behind her angrily. How could she not know it was a bet? Every second she cried seemed like the storm was coming through. She had begun to freeze, but didn't have the energy to move anyway, so she just let herself fall asleep, not giving a care in the world of what would happen to her. Would she be kidnapped by a villain? She didn't care. Would someone take advantage of her in her sleep? She didn't care. All she knew was she was so sick of fighting that finally she gave in and let herself fall soundly into sleep. Cornelius and Franny came out storming out of a fancy restaurant. I think it's pretty rude of them to talk about my hair like that, Cornelius said, insulted. And I think it's rude how they cook frogs. What kind of person would eat frogs? That's just simply wrong, Franny said. Okay, then it's agreed. We're never going back to this restaurant again, Cornelius decided, and Franny nodded. Cornelius and Franny smiled and held each other's hand. Though it had been a terrible restaurant, Franny was just happy to get some time with Cornelius, that it wouldn't matter where they were, especially now that Wilbur was confusing Franny. Something was going on with Wilbur, and Franny didn't understand it. Maybe it had something to do with that girl. You know, this Rachel girl has been coming over a lot lately. Do you think she could be the one for Wilbur? Franny asked. I don't know. I think she is lovely and would make a great wife for Wilbur, but I don't know. I guess I did always expect Violet Parr to be the one for him. Cornelius admitted. I know. I can't help but think lately that Wilbur has been shutting Violet out. I heard from Helen she started wearing her hair in front again. Franny said, I really worry about that girl. Bob told me she comes straight home after school now. Doesn't she usually hang out with Wilbur and those two Starla and Ricky at that Fast Burger? Cornelius asked. Yes, but we shouldn't worry. I mean, this is Violet and Wilbur we're talking about. They're not going to ruin one of the best friendships I've seen just for that. I'm sure they'll find their way back at each other. Franny smiled confidentially. Hey, honey, I think we should worry. About Violet, at least, Cornelius said frightenedly. Why? Franny asked. Cornelius didn't answer, but just pointed. He pointed to a young girl, all wet and pale, asleep, and her face was all puffy and red. Oh my God, Violet! Franny yelled in shock, grabbing her umbrella and putting it under Violet. Cornelius, check her pulse. Cornelius grabbed Violet's wrist and felt her pulse and frowned. She's alive, but not in very good condition. We got to go. Here, hold the umbrella, Franny ordered Cornelius. Cornelius took the umbrella, and Franny took Violet in her arms. For a teenaged girl, she was surprisingly light. They both ran to their car and put Violet in the back seat. But Franny wrapped a blanket that they kept in the cat around Violet. We better call Bob and Helen, Cornelius said. Chapter 13. It has to end. She woke up not remembering anything. She remembered people laughing at her. She remembered feeling so low, she almost used her powers to disappear. She remembers giving up. After fighting so hard all this time to keep her anger and frustration in, she didn't take it out, but she gave up. Where am I, she thought. She looked beside her. She only saw familiar sheets she's seen before, but has never slept in. She smelled a familiar smell. She looked beside her. She saw a side table with a picture of her and Wilbur during ski break, behind a picture of Wilbur and Rachel. So it was then she realized she was in Wilbur's room, sleeping in his bed. She looked beside her, and she saw Wilbur with a blue sheet, sleeping on the couch in his room. His room was just that huge. She stood up straight and felt her neck. She was sick, all right. She had a cold. Will? She said hoarsely. Her voice was so weak, the kind of feeling people felt after they'd sobbed so hard. She noticed she was in her PJs, and her backpack was on the floor. But apparently, it was loud enough, because Wilbur's eyes slowly fluttered open. Violet? He said, suddenly fully awake. He walked over to Violet and sat beside her on the bed. Are you okay? I'm fine. Why am I here? Violet asked. Well, you tell me. I'm on my date with Rachel. Next thing I hear, my mom and dad found you passed out when you're supposed to be on your date with Tony. What did Tony do to you? Wilbur panicked. Now, you have to understand how Violet was feeling in order to realize why she said what she said. Violet wanted nothing more than to tell the truth to Wilbur, that Tony lied to her, that he was scum. She wanted to let it all out. But at the same time, she knew Wilbur would murder Tony, kill him, bury him in a local forest, and no one would find him for 2 years. To be honest, a part of her wanted that. She wanted Tony to suffer for what he did. But she also knew that this wouldn't solve a thing, though she might feel a bit better if Tony did suffer. She wasn't comfortable with someone else fighting her battles. It was fine. He was nice, but I didn't think it'd work out. We went to a restaurant later, but I think the restaurant was bad because I felt dizzy. Food poisoning or something. Violet lied. She felt awful lying to him like this, but she had no choice. Are you sure? Wilbur asked. Positive. Well, if you say so, Wilbur said, but he wasn't entirely convinced. Maybe it didn't work out, 'cause I'm just not good enough for anyone, Violet said sadly as she hugged one of her pillows. She didn't mean to say it. Truth be told, she hated self-pity, much less the pity of others. But after she found out about Tony's true intentions, it was no surprise she said what she said. She felt so weak. Being a superhero, she hated feeling weak, and she had felt so weak, crying about Tony. She had feared she'd become what she had hated. Those girls crying over pathetic guys who didn't deserve her. "Hey!" Wilbur cried. "Don't say that. If there's someone not good for someone, it's Tony that's not good for you." Violet shook her head. She knew that Wilbur was trying to make her feel better, but it wasn't working that well. "How would you know? You've been AWOL for weeks. You barely talk to me. Starla or Sean. You've been hanging out with Rachel. I'm still mad at you for doing that, Wilbur. Don't think you can just change that," Violet blurted out. She was so sick of keeping that in. I didn't mean to shut you out. I didn't realize you felt this way." Wilbur sighed. Well, he didn't actually mean to shut her out, but he knew part of him did this on purpose. "Look, I'm really sorry I've been shutting you out, but I don't want to anymore. And there's a reason I've been hanging out with Rachel so much." This was it. Wilbur thought, "It's now or never." "Oh, really?" Violet asked sarcastically. "And what's that reason?" Wilbur sighed. Maybe this wasn't the best time to tell her. Look, for a long time now, You're really nervous about something, aren't you?" Violet asked. "How'd you know?" Wilbur asked. "You don't stutter," Violet said. "There was nothing you could never tell me. I mean, I told you I'm a superhero. You told me you almost destroyed the future. If anyone knew that, who knows what would happen? But we know those things about each other. Those were one of our biggest secrets, and we've confessed. What's so bad now that you're nervous to tell me?" "Well, see, I haven't been completely honest with you lately," he told her. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Well, to be honest, I like someone," he confessed. Violet nodded. "Rachel," she thought to herself, though she couldn't be more wrong. "And I'm not sure if that someone likes me because she likes someone that I could never compete with. Do you, know who that person is?" "Rachel. But I didn't know she liked somebody else. I thought she was dating you," Violet said. "Vi, I wasn't talking about Rachel," Wilbur told her. Violet stared at him, confused. She was thinking, trying to figure out who this was, but it was only now she had realized her face was just inches away from Wilbur's. And the answer came to her. He was talking about her, and she only noticed now the reason he was suddenly so close is because he was leaning towards her. Wilbur knew it was now or never. They were so close. And surprisingly, Violet was leaning towards him too. Both of them knew it was wrong, but they couldn't help themselves. Violet blushed, remembering that in less than 1 second they would kiss. But then, "Wilbur, Rachel's here!" Franny yelled from downstairs. Violet snapped back to her reality and pulled away, breathing heavy. Both of them stared at each other for a minute. The truth was, neither one of them wanted to move, knowing if they did, they'd have to do the right thing. I should probably go. She's probably waiting for me," Wilbur stuttered as he stepped out of the room, not even taking his eyes off her. But Violet did. She turned around and hugged the pillow close to her ears and closed her eyes, trying to fall asleep. It hurt too much to see or think about him with her. She had no reason to hate her. She was just an average girl who fell in love with the best guy ever. But she hated Rachel for ignoring the fact that Violet used to be his best friend, for making Wilbur so in love with her, for confusing her about her feelings for Wilbur. And as Wilbur turned the doorknob, he stared at the door and immediately knew he had to give it up. It was too much, too far, and someone got hurt in a way he didn't want. He decided he had to end this with Rachel. He felt bad about leading her on. He felt worse for making Vi feel this way. He'd been hurting 2 girls this whole time. Both never deserved it. He had to end it now, though it was probably too late. Chapter 14. Just a Kiss. Wilbur twitched nervously. In fact, Rachel noticed he's been twitchy from the very beginning that they left the house, and there was silence. Rachel blamed it on the insanely cold, teeth-chattering weather. But in reality, Wilbur was just afraid to give out any new information about him and Violet. He was practically hiding, under his dark brown jacket and scarf covering his mouth, and brown ski cap. It was as if he was afraid to be shown. In fact, only his onyx eyes and nose were showing. Rachel noticed this, and it bothered her. Sure, it was freezing, but even then, Wilbur had a reputation of actually speaking. For goodness sake, Rachel herself was in a skirt, and she managed to talk. She still wanted to speak, but the silence is what made the following so shocking. "Rachel, I think we need to see other people," Wilbur finally said. Rachel stopped in her tracks. First, he doesn't talk. He acts as cold towards her as he does with all the girls who had crushes on him. And now, he drops this bomb on her? What? Did I do something? I don't understand. Rachel was so at loss for words. She didn't notice her vision blurring at the tears. Wilbur shivered. He honestly never meant to hurt Rachel, much less make her cry. "It's not you. It's me," Wilbur said, thinking of the irony. When he was young, he and Violet used to make fun of breakup excuses, the first one being the one Wilbur just used. He never understood it before, thinking it was some kind of excuse just to say, "I don't like you anymore." But now he understood why. "Ain't he? That's what they all say," she said, the tears finally leaving her eyes. "If you're going to break up with me, tell me the real reason why. I deserve that much." Wilbur sighed. "You're right. You do deserve it. Listen, Rachel, I honestly never meant to hurt you, I swear. And I hope you don't think I'm some kind of jerk that does this kind of thing all the time, but this kind of thing?" Rachel repeated. She could honestly see Wilbur felt sorry, but she needed to know what it was. "What is this thing?" "The truth is I dated you to make someone jealous," Wilbur finally said. Rachel gave a broken gasp, putting her hand on her heart, as if she literally felt it breaking. "Oh no, please tell me you didn't." "You didn't," Rachel cried. I did," Wilbur admitted shamefully. "The truth is, Rachel, you deserve someone better than me. Heck, the girl I'm talking about deserves better than me. I'm a complete idiot, so please don't feel heartbroken." "Too late, Wilbur. Too late," Rachel said. "What the heck is it this week? Breakup week?" she asked to herself in her tears. "Wait, breakup week? Who else broke up?" Wilbur found himself saying, smacking himself mentally. "He just broke up with this girl, and now he's gossiping? Way to go, Robinson," he thought to himself. "Six and Tony, duh." Rachel yelled at him. Of course, after what that jerk did to her. Wilbur stopped walking and blinked. From what he heard from Vi, they parted good terms. But by the way Rachel talked, it seemed like something bad had happened. "What about her?" he asked rather quickly. Rachel kept on crying, then got angry. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Here he was, breaking up with her, and he wanted to talk about Violet Parr. Nevertheless, she told him what she knew, despite her tears, hoping it would get her mind off the breakup. She should have known she was slowly about to cause an explosion. The Robinsons insisted Violet stay for breakfast at least, but all she wanted to do was go into her own bed and listen to music or something that included not moving at all. Her parents knew it wasn't the time to ask questions, though Violet dreaded knowing she had to talk about it sometime. As she got into her bed, she turned her iPod on and listened to the first I Hate You song she found. But then, just as she got in the middle of the song and snuggling in her bed, her brother's obnoxious voice was all she heard. "Oh, Violet!" he yelled finally. Violet took one earbud off, annoyed. "God, what?" she snapped. "I saw St. John's blog," he said plainly. Violet froze. St. John was Starla's creepy, older by 1 year brother, who had a not-so-secret crush on her. "You know that creepy kid in your neighborhood?" The one who role-plays Harry Potter, complete with magic capes and wands in the forests with other geeky friends? The one who always seems to be there, following your every move? That was what Violet and many others called a Sinjin. There's geeks, socially awkward people, and creepy socially awkward geeks. In this case, Sinjin. But as if his creepiness wasn't enough, Sinjin also has a gossip blog for the school called Sinjin Scoops. It was wildly popular for someone who was often caught hiding in the girls' locker room, hence the reason Violet now changes in the girls' bathroom in a locked stall now. What lies did Sinjin say now? Violet asked, quietly hoping Sinjin didn't mention her date. I know what Tony did, Dash said. And don't worry, as we speak, 4 of my minions are filling his room with toilet paper, graffiti, and suspicious liquid. Violet gave a small smile. Normally, she didn't tolerate Dash's plans, but it was nice to know someone was on her side. Suspicious liquid? She repeated. I can't be held responsible for whatever Dan, Charlie, Becky, and Andy does. He replied smugly. Appreciate it, Dash, but it won't solve anything. Just do me a favor, and don't tell Dad or Wilbur, Violet told him, and suddenly shivered at the thought of what exactly they would do if they found out. Oh, Dash said sheepishly. Funny you should mention that, an hour ago, Sinjin Scoops had another post. Dash, what happened? Violet asked. From the moment Wilbur's face changed, Rachel knew she had set a walking terror loose. After learning what truly happened, Wilbur at first calmly asked Rachel where she thought Tony would be. When she answered he might be at Johnny Duncan's party, Wilbur suddenly changed direction. Rachel thought. She silently cursed under her breath, and then sent a text to her best friend, Lola. To Lola. From Rachel. SOS. Wilbur found out about what Tony did to Vi. I think he's gonna murder him. I need a ride to Johnny's. But what Rachel did was stupid, for she had forgotten Lola just happens to be one of the school's biggest gossipers. So the moment Lola received the text, it was forwarded to Sinjin, who was already preparing his camera. You can imagine how Ridinger felt. Stupid, foolish, cruel, and he deserved to. He didn't need to be told otherwise. He actually liked Violet. At first, he thought she was just some silly, weird, strange girl. But then he got to know her, and found out she was, in fact, very different from other girls. Many people say that, when all in all, their girls are nothing special, but Tony actually meant it. Every time he was with her, she always seemed so shy, sweet, wise, smart, and not obsessed with shopping or clothes or gossip, like most girls he dated were. She didn't want him to pay for her food or spend any money on her. But at the same time, there was something mysterious about her. She seemed so secretive, and she'd get this small smile whenever he'd approach a secret of hers, a certain, I can't tell you, but I have the power since you don't know. He noticed this empty feeling in his stomach as soon as he saw Violet running away, and he felt alone. But he shouldn't. He honestly cared for Violet, but he did not want his funk to affect his popularity. He showed up at Johnny's party. He didn't want to, but image was everything. Especially since Sinjin was rumored to be here. He'd want to interview him, surely. But he did not expect this. Out of nowhere, someone's fist connected with his face, right between the nose and the eyes. The perfect place to hit someone. It was guaranteed to leave a huge bruise. He could have sworn he felt his nose cracking. He flew backwards, and when he opened his eyes, he saw people he knew in every corner, barely able to focus, looking right at him. He then felt someone grab his collar and push him right back up. The pain was too much, and now his feet were on air, and he was being held up viciously against the wall. "Robinson, calm down," he heard someone yell. Tony can't say he was surprised. He did, after all, warn him. But that punch hurt a lot. He didn't expect him to hit that hard. He knew Wilbur wasn't exactly the school geek, but this was the kind of punch expected from a jock. "Why'd you do that, huh? Break some innocent girl's heart just for your amusement," Wilbur said with every word. He kept on shoving Tony against the wall. "I really did care for her," Tony insisted. And he wasn't exactly lying either. But whether he was lying or not now was not the issue. He lied to Violet before, and left her to be humiliated. If Wilbur's parents hadn't found her, imagine what exactly would have happened. The very thought of it made Wilbur angrier. Don't you get it, Tony? She's been my best friend for years, and when you mess with her, you mess with me, he repeated, only to punch Tony a 30th time. But before he could do any permanent damage, Sean ran from the other side of the room and grabbed Wilbur and pulled him away from Tony. "Don't, man," Sean told him, but Wilbur wasn't listening. "He hurt Violet, Sean. He deserves it. Let me go," he kicked and screamed. And Sean agreed with Wilbur. Tony deserves every inch of blood dropped for hurting Violet. She was like a sister to him, but he also knew Violet wouldn't want this to happen. His eyes shifted towards the dumbstruck jock friends of Tony Ridinger. To see the school's heartthrob covered in blood was strange and scary. They knew Wilbur had a temper, but not like this. "Well, don't just stand there. Get Tony away," Sean yelled to the group, then dragged Wilbur away. From the crowd and the party until they were outside the house, on the streets where no one was around. "What's wrong with you, man? Calm down," he demanded. But that only angered Wilbur more. "Sean, how can you just stand there, letting Tony go off scot-free, knowing what he did to Vi?" Wilbur snapped. "You don't think I'm angry? Violet's been like my little sister. I'm angry too, okay? In fact, earlier at the party, I yelled at him and caused a scene, but they held me back. And I didn't go on beating him up afterwards because I realized that's not what Violet would want," Sean said. Wilbur was panting. He felt all the anger slowly washing away, realizing Sean had a point. "Look, I know you're frustrated, but the thing is, beating up Tony will cause more of a scandal and drama for Violet. And you know Vi, she likes to stay invisible." "Huh, more invisible than you know," Wilbur thought to himself. "Whatever, either way, it's too late. I already beat him up enough to cause bruises." "Yeah, I saw that creep St. John already updating his blog on his phone, with pictures and videos. The whole thing's gonna erupt online, and come Monday, everyone will be on Violet's tail 24/7, Sean said. Wilbur suddenly felt a wave of guilt through him. He was so selfish. He didn't even think of how his actions would affect Violet's life. Wilbur was more or less used to having people insult him and talk about him all the time. Vi, however, was a different story. She hated being the center of attention. And add the fact that Wilbur's been ignoring her for quite a while, he wouldn't be surprised if she ended up hating him. "Maybe you should go talk to Vi. Prepare her for Monday," Sean suggested. Wilbur took a second glance at the party, rolling his eyes as he saw Ridinger's fangirls running to his aid. Wilbur nodded to Sean, telling him it was a good idea before heading off to see Violet. Oh, how he was terrified of it. You have not seen anger until you've been screamed at by a teenage superhero like Violet Parr. When he reached the Parr's door, he seriously considered running away in fear like those cowards in cartoons. But he didn't. Curse his Robinson pride. Instead, he knocked the door several times, anxious to see Violet, hoping nobody else would be there. Not that he didn't like the rest of the Parr family. Hey, he had his fair share of laughs with Dash and Mr. Parr. And who could forget the times Mrs. Parr would make him and Vi cookies on winter days? But he was already nervous with seeing Violet. He didn't feel the need to worry about anyone else. Oh, thankfully, once he knocked the door the first time, Violet opened the door. "Vi, hey," he began sheepishly. The fuming look of Violet told him she already knew. Before he knew it, she pointed a finger at him angrily. You, me, he said, officially scared. His pride dropped down, since he forgot just how scary Violet could be. In a second, she grabbed his arm and pushed him into her house, slamming the door shut. You, she said. If Wilbur wasn't so frickin' scared, he would have been impressed at the strength Violet displayed, despite still having a bit of a fever. He felt like a little boy looking at a strict parent after breaking the family vase, cowering in fear, wondering what Vi would do. What she did next shocked him. Instead of screaming at him in a rant, pacing back and forth angrily, or even hitting him, she ran up to him and put her arms around him and squeezed as hard as she could. Wilbur was so taken aback, he felt himself nearly tripping. She was still sick, as he could tell, since she was still warm. It felt odd to have Vi back in his arms. He's hugged her before, but it's been a while since they've even talked. He forgot the smell of her vanilla, strawberry-scented hair, how nice her smooth skin felt, and how perfect she was in his arms, as if she was meant to be there. Ahem, Wilbur thought to himself. He didn't even notice he was blushing violently. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Violet laughed as she kept on squeezing him. Wilbur would have told her he honestly couldn't breathe, but he was just so happy to have Violet happy with him. He found himself hugging her back. Welcome, he half asked. He wasn't so sure why she was happy. In fact, he was so sure she'd be mad. He was practicing his pouty dog face before coming in. That's how sure he was. Now he was just confused. Vi, I'm honestly happy you're happy, but why are you thanking me? He asked. He hated to have to end the hug, but he had to know why she was so happy. When she let go, her face matched her hug and her words. She had this huge smile on her face, and Wilbur found himself giving a small chuckle. Hopefully he was the reason for that smile. You do know that I beat up your boyfriend, right? He said slowly. He was suddenly scared of seeing Violet's smile drop, but it didn't. I know, she said, her smile growing smaller, but still as bright. More of a generous, soft smile now. Aren't you angry with me? I hit your boyfriend. Ex-boyfriend, Violet clarified. Ex-boyfriend, Wilbur corrected. Enough to cause him bruises that'll last a month. And now it's on St. John's Scoops, meaning the whole school will be staring at you and gossiping and all. Why are you thanking me? If anything, you should hate me. Tell me how stupid I was for doing it. Tell me you never want to see me again, he said, his voice slowly trailing off. He was suddenly imagining worst-case scenarios in a blink of an eye, and he would simply lose it if Violet were to ever do anything he just mentioned. Will, all this time, I thought you forgot about me, that you realized how great you really are, that you shouldn't be hanging out with an outcast like me, that you had the potential to hang out with cooler people, like Rachel Woods. I thought that you finally realized you were a better person than me, and when you started ignoring me, I thought that it meant our friendship was over, Violet explained. Wait, she honestly thought he was better than her? Wilbur always thought she deserved better than him, and when I read the blog post, I admit I was a bit angry. I mean, I thought you were stupid at first. Then I realized, if you did that, if you hit the most popular boy in school just for me, then it means you still care about me. Wilbur didn't answer at first. He felt terrible. Had he really made Violet feel this pathetic about herself? Did she always think she was beneath him? She was a smart, nice, incredible superhero, not to mention beautiful, good-looking, and Wilbur was just the son of a Robinson, stupid, outspoken, often stoic with behavior too rash for his own good, that Wilbur always thought, knew that Violet deserved better than stupid old him. But all this time, she thought the same way about him. His silence worried Violet. So did his frozen look. Horrified, put her hands on her cheeks in embarrassment. Oh God, that's not why you did it, did you? You don't care. You did it for another reason. Oh my gosh, Wilbur, I'm sorry, No, Vi, don't think that, Wilbur said in tone that was a mix of panic and worry as he held her arms. Don't you ever think I don't care about you. No matter what anyone says or does, I care about you, okay? Don't ever think otherwise, he demanded. Violet was shocked. It seemed like the idea of her thinking he didn't care absolutely terrified him. And don't ever think you're beneath me. I'm not as great as you think I am, Vi. I mean, look at you. You're smart, nice, caring, gentle, and beautiful. And I'm spoiled, mean, stubborn, rash, outspoken, stupid, cold. No, you're fun, Hilarious, determined, and you're smarter and more caring than you know. And if you're called it quote S only because as the son of Cornelius Robinson, you never know who to trust. Violet finished for him with a smile on her face. And you're afraid if you trust someone, they'll hurt you. That's why you act so cold sometimes. To keep them away from getting close to you. Am I right? Wilbur nodded, a bit shocked Violet knew so much about him. Granted, despite being polar opposites, they were best friends. But even best friends wouldn't know so much about matters of the heart. Guess he was proven wrong. Please, let's just have the rest of the day to ourselves, okay? For old time's sake? She asked, with a face so bright, even if he didn't want to, Wilbur probably wouldn't be able to refuse. Sure, he smiled. They decided to take a stroll around the neighborhood and just talk. Neither of them mentioned Tony, or what happened, or what would happen come Monday morning. They didn't care much. They talked about less important things, as they haven't been in a fight for a while. About their friends, family, some amusing stories from classes and all. But the night ended with a very important subject. I broke up with Rachel, Wilbur announced. This piece of news shocked Violet and caused her to stop in her tracks. They were right in the middle of the part of the neighborhood where there was a little park, with nice autumn trees surrounding them. What? Why? Violet asked, shocked Wilbur didn't say so in the first place. I broke up with Rachel, Wilbur repeated. Yeah, I heard that, but why? Violet asked. From what she's heard from St. John's scoops and seen from her very own eyes, Wilbur and Rachel were a happy couple, always hugging and cuddling and going on several dates. It was honestly enough to make Pee-Pee puke how disgustingly and annoyingly happy they were. Because I didn't like her, he merely said, and he thought that was enough to stop Vi from asking questions. Obviously, though, it wasn't. Come on, Wilbur. I'm not stupid. I know there's more to the story that you're not telling me. I mean, every time I looked at you, you were hugging and doing lovey-dovey couple stuff, Violet exclaimed. Well, that's normal, considering I was making sure you were looking every time we did those things, Wilbur thought. So tell me, why'd you break up with her? Or did she break up with you? Wait, did she cheat on you? I swear, if she did, I'm gonna... Relax, Vi. Wilbur laughed. Violet was pretty funny when she got protective. I broke up with her for a reason. Why? Violet asked. Wilbur took a deep breath. He pushed himself. Now was the time to tell her. After all, what was stopping him? They were in a park surrounded by autumn leaves. They were close to each other for body warmth. It was a nice night with the full moon shining bright. What was missing? Nothing. That's what. The fact that it was so perfect led Wilbur to believe this was the perfect time. Honestly, the whole time I dated Rachel, I was I liked someone else. Violet gasped, hoping that the shock in her voice and the darkness of the night cover her saddened face. She felt devastated. The whole time she thought that Wilbur dating Rachel was enough. Now she had to deal with someone else too? Not that she was jealous. Nope. Vi, just please hear me out. Wilbur pleaded. I know the plan was stupid, but I was panicking. The girl I liked was dating someone else. She was in love with this guy, so dating Rachel was like a plan I thought of in a second. I didn't really think about. She just happened to be there, and I know I screwed up. I hurt her feelings. But as selfish and jerkish as this sounds, I don't care. I only cared about the girl that I like's feelings. I don't think she knows how special she is to me. She's everything I could ever want, and everything I don't deserve. And I feel selfish for saying this. But I want her. I need her so badly. It hurts so much to think that her boyfriend decided to hurt her. I guess that's why I ended up bruising his face for hurting her. Violet's blue eyes stared at him in confusion. What is he saying? Wait a second, she thought. Why did this seem so familiar? Didn't he say something like this when they were in his room, when she woke up from her cold? No, that was a dream, wasn't it? Or, wait, Violet started, pointing to herself in shock. She was struggling to find the words to say. Thankfully, she didn't have to say anything, because next thing she knows, Wilbur's hands were on her hips, and she felt his lips crash into hers. His eyes were closed. Hers were wide open for the first few seconds of the kiss. She was shocked. This was all happening way too fast. She had just gotten heartbroken by some stupid guy yesterday. Was she really ready for this? Was she really willing to give a chance to a guy to break her heart again? Then she realized fast, she should add, that when this happened this morning, she almost kissed back. Was it possible that she just suddenly had feelings for him? Or were those feelings there all along, and she didn't notice? There were signs. She hated Rachel for being so close to Wilbur despite the fact that Rachel was so nice to Violet. That Violet remembered Wilbur when he'd time-skipped and shouldn't have even existed. When all those times she was with him, she felt happier and certain warmth inside of her. But she had always assumed those were feelings of a strong friendship. But then again, if they were just friends, then how come Violet had felt something inside of her she had never felt before with the kiss? That's how Violet Parr found herself finally closing her eyes during the kiss and kissing back, a smile tugging at her face. It was unseemly long, but sweet. There was nothing more than his lips just resting on hers, pressing his lips as if he wanted to claim her. But it somehow felt more passionate than they could have ever imagined. Violet realized that all this time, Wilbur's liked her. With one kiss, he made her forget everything that's happened, every tear she's shed. And as it turns out, she likes him too, maybe even more. But they had plenty of time to worry about that. Right now, they were living in the moment, just him and her, and a kiss. And both of them knew, no matter how many exciting or unbelievable moments they would soon have in their lives, nothing would compare to tonight. No matter how cheesy or cliché some might call it, this was literally the best night of their lives. Chapter 15. A Second Villain. Wilbur Robinson had always seemed energetic, adventurous, spontaneous, and happy, but that was just his personality. After all, why wouldn't he be happy? He had a very loving and caring, albeit abnormal, but nonetheless amazing family. He's never experienced any actual problems most kids go through, such as neglect or abuse. He always got what he wanted for his birthday and Christmas. He had few friends, but those friends were loyal and enough for him. But the truth was, he's only been so happy. So much that he felt like he was on cloud 9 a certain number of times in his life. Except when he first understood math. Since school started and nap and playtime ended, Wilbur had difficulties in this particular area. He always struggled and never understood anything. This caused his grades to fall badly. And the son of Cornelius Robinson failing was not an option. But somehow during the 3rd grade, he magically understood math and everything related to it from then on. It was now his best subject. And now, none of his grades were below average anymore. Granted, they weren't exactly honor roll worthy, but they were modest and good enough. When he first met Violet, you see, being the son of an inventor left no room for true friends. 50% of the kids who met him only liked him for his famous father, and the other 49% were prejudiced idiots who immediately labeled Wilbur as a rich snob who thought he was better than everybody. This caused a certain abrasiveness on Wilbur's part, and he often snapped at everyone. Violet, she didn't know him at all, but she was willing to apologize and forgive him for being so rude to her. It's not very often you meet those kind of people, his first best friend, and it's not every day you fall for your best friend. So yes, Wilbur considered his whole life a blessing, but it seemed that for that past 5 months, Wilbur hated seeing Violet so, well, let's just say superhero work was tiring. Violet had to skip classes, go to the bathroom and never return, come in late. Her grades were dropping, all because of super calls. Mrs. Parr was aware of this, but it wasn't as if she could change much. Violet always seemed so tired, but what Wilbur truly hated was her skipping and grade dropping earned her a new reputation, and not a good one. So no, for example, the latest rumor involved Violet being a delinquent and the mob boss of a mafia gang. I swear I saw her trading some papers with a cop. I bet she's bribing him for breaking her parole. Wilbur heard some girl giggle to her friends one day. He groaned. All he had wanted was to grab something by his locker, not hear about how Violet is apparently a wanted mob boss. Wilbur banged his head against his locker. He knew for a fact that the papers Violet's been giving that cop were crime scene reports from a criminal she had stopped only days ago. Geez, how pathetic. I heard her brother's been skipping too. But he doesn't look as tired as Violet. In fact, they say he's top of his gym class, the girl's friend said. Very true. Dash never got tired, ever. He would say sleeping counted, except Dash never showed fatigue before wanted to sleep. He just fell asleep. He never got tired, so he didn't have the dark circles under Vi's eyes, or the migraines or lack of sleep. Plus, Dash could get in and out of school in literally 10 minutes, making the diarrhea excuse. Please, there's no connection. It's just a family of delinquents. I heard their baby brother never changes clothes. He only wears a red suit. How pathetic. They're probably poor. I bet Parr's doing illegal work to pay for her pathetic family. That sentence was followed by a huge laughter among the girls. But the laughter was followed by a booming noise, caused by Wilbur's slammed locker. The girls stopped giggling and turned to see Wilbur Robinson, famous son of Cornelius Robinson and practically trillionaire. His eyes filled with anger directed at them. Honest, it wasn't as if Wilbur was the ultimate rebel bad boy of the school, but he was known for being a prankster and outspoken. But no one's ever really seen Wilbur angry, and Wilbur was sure that if he didn't promise Violet, he wouldn't hurt anyone, and if these weren't girls, he would have gone crazy and it would have been a bloodbath. But he didn't do anything. All he did was say, "Shouldn't you be minding your own business?" Wilbur spat, leaving a bunch of girls gasping in shock as he left for class. He went to English class later, trying his best to get rid of his anger. He knew the rumors didn't really affect Violet, so logically, even he shouldn't be affected. But he was. Yet he knew if Violet knew he was angry, she would get worried about him. He almost slapped himself at the irony. The girl saves people but can barely take care of herself. He hasn't even seen her since lunch, which was cut short when Bon Voyage decided to take a little trip to another bank. He remembers she didn't even finish her meal. But she was back for English class, her head buried between her arms, her shirt wrinkled and her headband missing. He sighed as he sat down and pushed her hair from her face, waking her up from her half-slumber. She looked up at him and smiled. "Hey," she greeted. "Are you okay?" "You look tired," Wilbur said, his voice filled with worry. "I'm fine, I swear," she said. No, she wasn't. She was struggling to keep herself awake. "Vi, what's up with you? You've been kind of weird lately," Starla commented. "Yeah, and there are rumors around school," Sean said. Wilbur knew what he meant, but Violet shook it off. "I'm fine. It's just Jack's been keeping me up lately. I think he's teething." Starla and Sean bought it, and Wilbur might have too, if he didn't know the truth. Starla and Sean saw that just talking about it made Violet tire, so they dropped it. Wilbur immediately placed his hand on hers, giving her a supportive smile. Violet smiled back, knowing Wilbur was killing himself for not being able to do anything about it. "Anxiety." But right behind them, Rachel glared as she saw their fingers intertwine, thinking that used to be her and Wilbur. But now that she thought about it, Wilbur never showed that much attention to her. She nearly snapped her pencil, glaring holes into Violet's back. But she would get her revenge, sooner than she thought. Violet was ecstatic. It was autumn break, meaning two things. One, the Halloween carnival was approaching, and she loved carnivals more than anything. And two, she would finally get to unwind from school stress. But the one thing she will never get rid of is superhero stress, she thought miserably. Wilbur's been so supportive, knowing what she's going through. Sean's been threatening anyone who dared say a word against Violet, and so was Starla. Except Starla was more threatening the gossipy girls. Violet had never been so happy to have the greatest friends ever. But the greatest friends could never change her, and who she is. It was like she already had a job, and it was killing her. But it was killing Wilbur, too. Sure, some of the business included average thieves and robbers, but some of it included dangerous things. And Wilbur was in constant turmoil, wondering whether or not Vi would come back. She always did. The most dangerous mission she's been on so far is Kronos, the whole syndrome debacle, and he was long gone. Or so they thought. Violet always loved carnivals. They were fun, got her adrenaline up, and they always put her in a good mood. But she can't deny she often felt jealous of couples going to the carnival. Very, very jealous. They just seemed so happy. Finally, she found someone she loved, and she was finally going to a carnival with him. And this would be considered their first date. So she didn't waste a second. She finally gave in to Starla's demand, and for the first time, used makeup. Though it felt uncomfortable at first, she can't deny that it made her look very pretty. Starla had put her hair up in a high pony and left a couple of strands down, framing her face. Starla noted that this was the first time she'd seen Violet's hair like this, and she found it simply gorgeous. She had worn a fun shirt, a leather beige jacket, shorts and high-top sneakers. Simple and appropriate for a carnival ride. As for Wilbur, he tried not to look like his everyday self. Not fancy, but something different. He remembers Violet jokingly saying she thought cayenne blue looked good on him, so he wore a white shirt and his soul cyan blue plaid shirt. He wore light blue jeans and his usual sneakers, and threatened Sean that if he touched his hair one more time that he would castrate him. Violet and Starla met up with Wilbur and Sean, and Starla winked slyly at Sean, knowing Sean had done what she instructed, which was to dress Wilbur up a little. It seemed to work, because Violet caught her breath. She loved it when Wilbur wore any form of light blue because, for some reason, it always seemed to work so well with him. Wilbur had no idea what it was, her mood or her hair up, but Violet seemed less tired and more excited, wearing a smile on her face that mirrored itself on Wilbur's own face. How could he not smile when his girl was smiling after weeks of being exhausted? "Ooh, let's go in the tunnel of love," Starla suggested. Wilbur and Violet scrunched their noses. Oh, don't get them wrong. They're into the whole love thing. But given their experiences with robots, they'd rather avoid creepy bear robots that sing the same love song over and over. You know what? Why don't you two go ahead and do that? And me and Will'll just try one of those game booths and we'll meet up in 30 minutes in front of the roller coaster? Violet suggested. Okay, bye. Starla smiled as she dragged Sean to the tunnel. Both Wilbur and Violet had to laugh as they saw Sean's "Dear God, dear Lord, help me" look on his face. Well, 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 if it isn't Willet. Johnny laughed. Dang, Parr, looking good. Finally decided to act like a normal girl and use makeup. Violet was taken aback, obviously. She couldn't tell if Johnny was genuinely saying that she was attractive or if he was being sarcastic. People like Johnny never complimented her. But Wilbur knew better. What Johnny was doing was a mix of honesty and spite. Johnny probably did think that Violet looked good, but at the same time, Johnny was about to say something that would hurt her. You know what, Johnny? I think it's time you leave, Wilbur said with a hint of malice in his tone, something Violet was not used to hearing. Yes, Wilbur was outspoken, but he was rarely genuinely angry at people. Not like this. She was so surprised. She failed to notice Wilbur's hand slipping back into hers. Oh, come on now, Robinson. I just want little Violet here to know just how popular she's become, Johnny told Wilbur before turning to Violet. I mean, come on. A nobody who gets a makeover then becomes a hottie overnight? Dates the most popular guy in school, then dumps him for the richest guy in school? You can't do stuff like that and not expect the entire school to know about it. Okay, first off, Wilbur was my best friend before ever being the richest guy in school. And second, it's not like I completely changed my personality. I was always like this. It's just that no one's ever tried to get to know me before, and I didn't get a makeover. I just stopped caring about what other people thought of me. I wasn't even looking to be more attractive for anyone, except maybe my boyfriend. Violet said honestly, Tony, who stayed silent so far, can't say he wasn't surprised. For all he's known her, she never actually defended herself much. She tried, but she never could, because she was always just a little bit too hesitant. Now she's speaking her mind not to anyone, but one of the meanest guys in school. Wow, you're not trying? You must be amazing then when you are trying. Tony slipped out. He wanted to cover his mouth. He didn't mean for it to get out. He knew it was wrong. The girl had a boyfriend. He couldn't just spew things out like that. But then again, Rachel did make the good point earlier in saying that Wilbur didn't deserve Violet. Violet didn't feel a thing when he said it. Just confusion. In fact, she was confused with the whole situation. But before she could say anything, Wilbur beat her to it. Yeah, okay. I know she's amazing, okay? Why do you think I'm dating her? The difference is, I knew she was amazing before her little makeover, like you said. But guess what, Ridinger? You had your shot and you blew it. So just turn around and go find yourself some girl who's sad and miserable enough to date you now that everyone knows what you did, Wilbur said forcefully. Violet shouldn't feel so good when Wilbur is verbally attacking someone, but it felt so good for once to have someone protect her than the other way around, which was usually the case for her. You know, given her job. She resisted the urge to smile and reassuringly squeezed Wilbur's hand. Strange. You were never this protective with me, Wilbur, Rachel commented. With all the fuss about Tony, Wilbur almost forgot Rachel's presence. She hated him. It was plain and simple, and she made no effort to hide it. And why should she? He did a despicable thing to her. He knew that. Wilbur couldn't find a proper way to apologize, but he did try to make the breakup with less publicity as possible. Less humiliation. Suddenly it hit Wilbur. They weren't here to have fun. Maybe they did, but now that they found him and Violet having fun, they would never stop following them. And Wilbur was fine for being cruel to Ridinger. No matter how sorry he claimed to be, it doesn't change his actions. It needs... But he was no Hippocyte. Wilbur knew he and Tony weren't so different from each other, due to both of them using innocent girls. The difference was that Violet was willing to forgive and forget. Rachel, he wasn't so sure, and he admits that he completely forgot about Rachel. Can you blame him? This is the happiest he's been in his life. But now, the guilt came rushing back, and Wilbur felt like his perfect night just automatically crashed. So he decided he couldn't stare at Rachel a second longer. Yeah, say, Vi, didn't you have your eye on those corn dogs? Wilbur said, putting his hands on Violet's shoulder and slowly pulling her away in an attempt to change the subject. Oi, what? No, I mean, I ate a caramel apple just 10 minutes ago, Violet answered, clearly not understanding what he was trying to do. Nah, I think you want more, Wilbur urged her as he kept on pulling her away from the group, hoping she would get the message. But I don't. Violet started, but Wilbur finally pulled her away fast enough from Rachel. His hands moved from her shoulders to her hand, and without realizing it, they were both practically running away from them. Not that they were following, but Wilbur was running away from something bigger. That awful feeling of accusing someone of being a jerk, Tony, only to remember you did the exact same thing he did that made him a jerk. Wilbur, Violet yelled, getting him to stop immediately. He paused, looking at the ground for a moment or two. He heard Violet's voice faintly in the background, and his hand still clutching hers. Yet his vision was blurred. He was panting, and he suddenly felt horrible. Suddenly, just as fast as he blocked out from the world for a split second, he came back as soon as he noticed the ticket seller in front of him. Are you two going or not? The ticket seller, obviously a hopeless adult, asked in a bored tone. Yeah, sure, Wilbur finally answered. Violet staggered, confused. She didn't say anything as she followed into the Ferris wheel booth. The booth's windows were large enough for a small person to fall through, and judging from the Ferris wheel's impressive height, this was a bit unnerving. In any other occasion, Violet would have refused to go in. No, she was not afraid of heights. But after all that food, she just didn't want to take any chances. Oh, And, she's never been in a real Ferris wheel. Well, she has, but the kind that's as tall as a small building, and the kind where you sit on it. Not one where you could see the whole town. But now she was just concerned with Wilbur. As they got into the booth, Wilbur sighed in relief, leaned against the window and stared at the sky. The Ferris wheel began to move, and Wilbur watched as everyone else became nothing but specks of color. Deep in thought, he had almost forgotten he was on a date with Violet, who immediately wondered what was going through his head. Literally, 10 minutes ago, he seemed happier than he's ever been. Now he seemed almost depressed. "Wilbur, what's going on?" she asked. "Am I a terrible person?" He asked, just as soon as she asked, not even answering her first question. As one might suspect, Violet was surprised with Wilbur's sudden question. Where did that come from? What? Of course not. Why would you even ask me that? Violet asked in confusion. I was so angry for what Tony did to you. I swear, when I was going to that party to make him pay for what he did to you, all I could think about was how of a stupid little jerk he was. I mean, using a girl for a prank. For a dare, even? Who does that? But now I just realized, I'm no better. I mean, I used Rachel to make you jealous. I keep telling myself that it's not the same, but it is. I'm just as big of a heartless idiot as he was. Wilbur confessed. Whoa, Wilbur. You're completely missing the point here. Yes, what you did wasn't right. But here's the big difference. What Tony did was to impress his friends. For laughs. For nothing. You did what you did because you got scared, and you thought you were losing me to Tony. You weren't thinking straight, so you can't exactly be blamed for what you did, Violet said. Maybe, but so what if the reasons were different? I still did the exact same thing he did that made him a player. But actually, that makes me worse, because I knew what he was doing was wrong. But I did it anyway. Wilbur added, Clearly you're underestimating Tony. He may be a jerk, but he's not stupid. He knew what he was doing the entire time. You didn't realize what you were doing until after. That doesn't exactly make you innocent, but it makes you better than Tony, Violet argued. But I'm the exact same person as Tony. Wilbur began once more. Violet rolled her eyes. She loved him. But for the love of God, did that boy ever shut his mouth? Violet grabbed his shoulders and decided to shut him up the only way she knew how, by kissing him. Seriously. Wilbur would have been so shocked by her sudden kiss if he wasn't so impressed. Strangely enough, considering her personality, kisses seemed to be the only thing Violet was truly confident with. It wasn't even a big deal kiss as their first. It was just a sweet, humble little kiss. But as their first one was practically screaming, I have loved you this whole time, and right now I'm proving it to you. This sweet one was saying, Please stop worrying. I'm here for you. When Violet broke the kiss, she blushed as she realized Wilbur was blushing furiously as well. In a way, she found it hilarious. The troublemaker Wilbur Robinson was blushing at a faint kiss from ever so innocent Violet Parr. As I was saying, you know just how hurt I was by what Tony did. Do you think, if what he did hurt me so bad, I would be dating you if you were the same person as Tony? Violet explained. Wilbur stood speechless as she released his shoulders. You're so much more than you give yourself credit for, you know. You're always telling me that. But you never use that rule for yourself. Violet smiled as she gently caressed his cheek. Wilbur gave a smile he just couldn't stop even if he tried. You're right, he said. Violet laughed, and so did he in relief, once again leaning against the window. You know, you turned out to be a much better girlfriend than I could have ever known. Wilbur smiled. Thanks, Violet chuckled. And for all it's worth, I didn't know what to expect when we started going out. But moving from friends to boyfriend and girlfriend has been surprisingly easy. Exactly. It has been pretty easy if you count out the superhero thing, Wilbur commented, to which Violet replied with a, Shh. Vi, we're in a Ferris wheel. No one can hear us, Wilbur assured her with a laugh. Call him crazy. but he found it hilariously adorable how paranoid Violet could be sometimes. "I can't help it," Violet protested, pouting as Wilbur laughed. "A hero's identity is the most precious thing to themselves. You can only tell who you truly are to your closest and loved ones, and them only. And you chose to tell me." Wilbur smirked. "Why, I'm honored, Miss Parr." "Well, you did sneak up on me and saw me use my powers." She grinned. "But I think that along the line I would have told you. Eventually, after some time," Wilbur repeated her words, rolling his eyes. "Whatever. Enough hero talk. Actually, enough hero and Rachel and Tony talk. I'm pretty sure we were here on a date." He grinned. "We were? I had no idea." Violet feigned surprise. They both finally sat down on the bench, and Violet rested her head on Wilbur's shoulder. Then they were interrupted by the sound Vi hated the most. Her emergency phone. They both groaned as Violet answered. "Mom, you promised. Tonight I'd be completely free, remember?" Violet asked. "Vi, get your friends and get as far away from the carnival as possible now," her mom ordered in a worried voice. "What? Why?" Violet was interrupted when the wheel's booth started shaking violently back and forth. Her phone flew out of her hands, out of the booth, and splattered on the ground. Wilbur quickly grabbed a hold of Violet and tried to grab onto just anything that could keep them still. "Vi, what's going on?" Wilbur yelled through the turbulence. "I don't know," Violet answered fearfully. Just then, the wheel began to spin at an abnormally fast rate, back and forth, and Violet watched in horror as she saw a booth detach itself from the wheel and flying into the air. Just before it hit the ground, Violet quickly put a force field around it, giving it a safer landing. Then, she quickly realized that where the booth landed was pretty far, and it took a toll on her, and it was followed by a headache. In the distance, she swore she could hear someone yell, "Oh my God, Invisigirl's somewhere in the carnival!" "Vi, you don't have your suit or your mask. Be careful," Wilbur warned, and his grip around her waist tightened. He was afraid she would fall if he let go even a bit. Violet had to think quick, and she had to think now. Without a second thought, she turned around and quickly kissed Wilbur with the wheel's speed, whipping both their faces. When she pulled apart, she whispered, "Sorry, Wilbur," she muttered, before she pushed him out of the booth with a force field surrounding him. The force field allowed Wilbur to practically fall on the ground, feeling nothing but a slight jolt. Still, he fell on his face, and several people who were trying to fix the wheel frantically helped him up. "You okay, kid?" one of the maintenance men asked. Wilbur didn't answer. He only frantically grabbed the man's collar. "You have to stop that wheel. My girlfriend's still there." "Kid, what do you think we've been trying to do? The circuits are messed up and someone tampered with it. We're not in control anymore. Every ride right now is going crazy," the man said. Wilbur's eyes widened in fear. Looking at where the men gathered, there was a tiny room not far from the wheel. Since the wheel was the center of the carnival, Wilbur suddenly realized that it was only natural that the electricity for the whole fair and the control of the rides ran in the center and near the wheel. He ran as fast as he could towards the room, pushing others in the way. "Hey, kid, what do you think you're doing? This is high-tech stuff. If we can't do it, what makes you think that you can?" one of the men asked. Wilbur only needed to take one look at the control system to know something was wrong. The circuits and wires weren't connected right. They were all mix-matched. Suddenly, the memory of his father and his constant ramblings flashed before Wilbur's eyes, and he suddenly remembered everything his father used to tell him about carnival rides and their circuits when he was a child going with his father to the fair. It only took a couple of seconds for Wilbur to set everything straight, but something was still wrong. So Wilbur examined every inch of the computers, only to find that behind each ride's control system, something was stabbed onto the computers that probably manipulated the controls. They were the same things. Small round pods with an S on them, with a small bleeping light, one on each computer. S? Syndrome, Wilbur recalled. Violet's first and most dangerous villain. He could never forget that name. The wires were all messed up, and you need to get rid of these things," Wilbur noted. The men around looked at what Wilbur was pointing at. "Oh, we never thought to check there." "Well, come on, just use a hammer or something," he said. "No," Wilbur ordered. "Destroying that thing might destroy every computer system and turn every ride off. Turning off the rides might kill some of the people. We just need to disconnect it from the computers." "Yeah, but when we tried using the computers, look what happens," the man said. He turned on the computer, only to reveal big red letters asking for a password. "Okay, think. Wilbur, think. Syndrome's behind this, so what's the password?" Wilbur thought. "This is the really creepy part," Violet said, sitting next to Wilbur. "When my dad saw Gazerbeam, he noticed the Gazerbeam spelled out the word Chronos. And when my dad hacked into Syndrome's computer, he wrote Chronos, and that was the password. That was directly after Wilbur discovered Vi's powers. Figuring he had nothing to lose, he tried Chronos on the computer, hoping he spelled it right. So, welcome!" The men rejoiced as Wilbur found the password. Immediately, he was greeted with a window that was written, "Contromes, Control on Ride Status." He was guessing those little pods with S across them on the computer were the Contromes. Wilbur saw a little button written, "Terminate Control" on the window, and immediately clicked on it. "The rides are back to normal," someone outside announced. The men surrounding Wilbur cheered. "This kid's a genius. How'd he figure it out?" one asked. "What's your name, kid?" "Oh my God, that's Wilbur Robinson, Cornelius Robinson's kid." Wilbur barely rejoiced in his glory. There was still something else he had to see. He ran out, seeing all these people and expecting his girlfriend to be one of them. Instead, he found Sean and Starla running into him. "Wilbur, what's happening?" Starla asked hysterically. "Someone hacked into the computers and was controlling the rides." Wilbur explained brilliantly. "Where's Violet?" "We don't know. We thought she was with you," Sean exclaimed. The trio's eyes widened in horror as they realized what this meant. Then they heard the sound of someone's head being bashed against something. They turned their eyes up to the Ferris wheel, where someone was banging Violet's head against the roof of one of the wheel's booths, the one that was at the very top. Meanwhile, Violet was trying to get as many people out. But in the fast speed, making multiple force fields for people wasn't easy. Her routine was to find the booth closest to the ground, push people out and put a force field around them, and make sure they landed safely. Plus, she had to make sure she wasn't seen. She had no mask or costume, so she couldn't be invisible. She had to keep an eye out while keeping people safe at a fast speed. Suddenly, she noticed that the wheel was beginning to slow down. She was the only one in the wheel left, and she was still pretty high up, but she still sighed in relief. Working so fast gave her a headache. She hasn't experienced a headache like this since her first giant force field. But this felt different. More ... intense. Her vision blurred. But the worst part was she probably couldn't ask a doctor about this. What if it was related to her powers? The perks of being a super... Violet thought sarcastically. Wow, now she was using sarcasm when in pain. Next thing she'll be saying, "That is an excellent question. 24/7." She assumed some people would eventually notice she was still up, and Wilbur would look for her. And she couldn't exactly shimmy down in a force field, could she? So she simply settled for sitting down and waiting, sighing heavily. She closed her eyes for just a second, and when she opened them, a metal claw-like object was right in front of her and took her by surprise. The claw grabbed Violet's neck like a fist wrapped around her and held her high up in the air. She grabbed the claw, gasping for air, and looking down. The claws belonged to a man who stood in front of the highest booth on the wheel, and Violet could see people gathering round to watch. She realized it was not Syndrome, not even close, but it was someone who looked like him. But he looked older, and he reminded her of one of those villains in the comics Wilbur used to read. She recognizes the robot from the Chronos mission's claws, which had been attached to the man's body, and also recognized the laser beams from the robot, which covered the man's eyes. The same material from the robot seemed to have stuck itself on the man, making him look like a humanized version of the first robot she fought. "And Parr," the man said, "it seems I have the wrong one." As he said this, he brought Violet closer to his face to examine hers. Big mistake. She responded by swiftly kicking him on the lower side of his face, the only human part she could see, releasing his grip on her and letting her drop on the booth's roof. "Oh, say, but you're the invisible one who fights like she's been trained to her whole life. Tell me, Miss Parr, was it hard to master 15 different types of martial arts in a very, very short amount of time? Well, I guess it's no surprise. Supers do learn faster than the average man," he noted. "How did you know that?" Violet demanded. "You can learn a lot by merely observing." Poor Violet. While her brother can go on having limitless energy, she can barely focus on her studies with super work, let alone her love life. By the way, how is the young Robinson? Does he know he's dating a glorified murderer? He asked. "Don't you dare bring him up," Violet ordered as she jump-kicked him. The man decided to play fair and use his knowledge of martial arts as well. He avoided her right foot's kick, but did not avoid her left foot's upper kick on his jaw, making him fall back. One of his claws grabbed the ledge of the roof before he could fall. "And who are you calling a murderer?" Violet demanded. "Oh, don't worry, dear. You're only taking 1/5 of the blame. The rest of it goes to the rest of your family," he calmly answered as his claws pulled him back. "My family never killed anyone." Violet raged as she went in for another hit, but the man decided to use his claws again. His claws held her by her waist and repeatedly slammed her against the roof. "Oh, really? Are you sure?" he sneered. Violet slowly started to lose consciousness, and whoever the man was, he was getting ready to finish the job, until several lights were suddenly blinding him, and he heard the words, "We have you surrounded. Release the girl now." He looked down and saw that indeed the police had surrounded him, including some helicopters that were on their way. He looked at the girl, nearly unconscious, and sneered, "Tell your family that I will avenge my boy, and tell your boyfriend to be careful. Loving a super can be very dangerous for someone normal." He dropped Violet on the roof, allowing the police on the helicopters to take her afterwards. He flew away, dodging several bullets as he did. Violet only thought of one thing before she collapsed. Tell your boyfriend to be careful. Loving a super can be very dangerous for someone normal. End file. 0%, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%, 100%.